At 2:13 a.m., medical illustrator Raina Vale sends 3 words to the wrong number. I can't anymore. The reply comes from Lucien Moretti, a name that doesn't exist in public records but controls half of Manhattan's underground empire. What starts as accidental honesty between two strangers becomes something far more dangerous, intimacy without lies. But when enemies discover Lucian's one weakness, the entire city becomes a battlefield. This is a story about finding the one person who sees the truth inside you and refuses to leave. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop a comment below telling me where you're from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. Raina Vale's kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and something closer to defeat. She sat on the floor with her back against the refrigerator, knees drawn up, phone glowing between her hands like a small, desperate beacon. The apartment around her was dark, except for the overhead light humming too loudly above the sink. Rain hammered against the window and sheets, turning Manhattan into a blurred watercolor of neon and misery outside the glass. Her best friend hadn't answered in 3 days. Raina had sent 12 messages, 12 careful, measured attempts at connection that had disappeared into digital silence without explanation or acknowledgement. The kind of silence that made you wonder if you'd done something unforgivable without realizing it, or if the friendship had just quietly died somewhere along the way and nobody bothered to mention it. She typed the 13th message with shaking hands. I can't anymore. 3 words. No context, no explanation, just raw honesty stripped down to its bones. She hit send before she could stop herself, then immediately wanted to claw the message back out of the air. Too honest, too vulnerable, too much. The phone buzzed 7 seconds later. Raina stared at the screen. The reply came from a number she didn't recognize. That's the first honest thing anyone said to me in a long time. Her breath caught. Wrong number. She'd sent her breakdown to a complete stranger. She should have apologized, blocked the contact, pretended it never happened. Instead, she typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came faster this time. Someone who appreciates honesty. Who are you? Raina sat there on her kitchen floor while thunder rolled somewhere over the East River and thought about all the careful ways people avoided telling the truth. How every conversation in her life felt like a performance, everyone reading from invisible scripts, saying what they thought they should say instead of what they actually meant. She typed, "Someone having a bad night. Tell me about it." And somehow, impossibly, she did. But the conversation lasted until 4 in the morning. Raina told this stranger about her work illustrating human anatomy for surgical atlases, about spending 14 hours a day rendering the hidden architecture of bodies, muscles, nerves, blood vessels, the structures that kept people alive but nobody ever saw. She told him about how lonely it felt to understand so much about what held humans together physically while feeling completely disconnected from them emotionally. The stranger, he never offered a name, listened in a way that felt almost dangerous. He asked questions that cut directly to the center of things, not the polite surface questions people usually asked, but the ones that exposed the raw nerve underneath. Why medical illustration specifically? Because I wanted to understand how people work, how they're built, how they break. And did you? Understand? The anatomy, yes. The people, no. Maybe people aren't meant to be understood. Maybe they're just meant to be seen. Raina sat with that response for a long time. Rain still hammering against the window, the kitchen light still humming overhead. Something about the statement felt true in a way that made her chest tight. She fell asleep on the kitchen floor with her phone still in her hand. When she woke up 6 hours later, there was one more message waiting. Sleep well. Botek. The messages continued. Not constantly. Not with the desperate frequency of someone trying too hard. Just occasional, precise points of contact that felt like standing too close to a ledge. Raina found herself checking her phone compulsively between sketching sessions, during lunch breaks, in the middle of crowded subway cars, waiting for the next message with an anticipation that felt both thrilling and terrifying. They never exchanged photographs, never offered last names. The anonymity created a strange kind of intimacy, conversations stripped of performance and pretense, just two voices in the dark telling each other the truth. 3 weeks in, Raina realized she was telling this stranger things she'd never told anyone. About her mother dying when she was 17, about the medical illustration career that started as a way to understand death by studying life, about the carefully constructed distance she kept between herself and everyone around her. He told her almost nothing about himself, just fragments, pieces. I work late. I don't sleep much. I've spent most of my life around people who lie professionally, but somehow he listened more carefully than anyone she had ever known. One night, past midnight, Raina asked the question she'd been avoiding. Why do you keep talking to me? The response took longer than usual. 3 minutes? 5. Long enough that she wondered if she'd finally pushed too far. Then, because you're the only person who doesn't want anything from me. Raina stared at the message. How do you know I don't want anything? Because you don't know who I am. Sounds. It was a Saturday morning in late January when everything changed. Raina sat in her studio apartment with coffee going cold on the desk beside her, working on a complex rendering of the human heart for a cardiothoracic surgery textbook. The illustration was almost finished. Chambers, valves, major vessels all meticulously labeled and shaded. She'd been texting with the stranger the night before about literature. He'd mentioned reading a translation of The Stranger by Camus in the original French, which seemed like an odd detail to share. Specific enough to be true, vague enough to reveal nothing. On impulse, she opened her laptop and typed a search. Reading Camus in French Manhattan. The results came back immediately. Articles, headlines, photographs. Lucien Moretti, heir to the Moretti Syndicate, the invisible architect behind one of the most feared criminal operations on the East Coast. Raina's hands went numb. She scrolled through article after article, each one worse than the last. Federal investigations. Suspected connections to organized crime spanning 3 decades. A family empire built on violence, extortion, and carefully maintained invisibility. There were only 3 photographs of him in public record, all taken from a distance, all showing the same thing: a man in his early 30s with dark hair and features sharp enough to cut glass, moving through the world like someone accustomed to surviving gunfire and betrayal. In one photo, barely visible, she could make out a book in his hand. The spine was in French. Raina felt like she was going to be sick. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and typed one word. Lucien? The reply came 30 seconds later. Yes. No denial, no manipulation, no carefully constructed excuse, just truth. Raina sat there staring at the screen while her entire understanding of the past 3 weeks rearranged itself into something far more dangerous. Every unanswered question suddenly acquired teeth. Every vague response became evidence of something she should have seen coming. She typed, "You lied to me. I never lied. I just didn't tell you who I was." That's the same thing. No, it's not. Raina stood up and paced her apartment, phone clutched so tightly her knuckles ached. She should block the number, delete every message, pretend this never happened. Instead, she typed, "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have kept talking to me if I had?" She didn't answer because they both already knew. 3 minutes passed. Then another message arrived. "I'm sorry. I should have been honest earlier. I understand if you want to stop." Raina looked at those words for a long time. Every rational part of her brain was screaming to walk away, to run, to put as much distance between herself and Lucien Moretti as physically possible. But something else kept her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The truth was, nothing about their actual conversations had changed. He'd never performed for her, never tried to impress her, never pretended to be anything other than exactly who he was, someone surrounded by liars who found her honesty addictive. She typed, "I have one condition. Name it. No lies, ever. About anything. Agreed. I'm serious. The second you lie to me, I'm gone. Understood." Raina sat down slowly, heart hammering against her ribs. Okay. Let's meet. The cafe was crowded. Neutral territory in Midtown Manhattan, under gray winter skies that threatened snow but hadn't delivered yet. Raina arrived 15 minutes early and ordered black coffee she didn't drink, sitting at a table near the window where she could watch the entrance. She told herself she could still leave. Right up until he walked in, she could stand up and disappear into the crowd and never look back. Then Lucien Moretti stepped through the door. Raina recognized him before he reached the table. Not because she knew his face from the photographs, but because the entire room subtly rearranged around him. Conversations lowered, eyes moved, tension shifted in ways most people probably didn't even register consciously. He walked like someone accustomed to violence. Lucien spotted her immediately, which meant he'd already known exactly where she'd be sitting before he entered. That should have been terrifying. Instead, it just felt inevitable. He sat down across from her without ceremony. "Reina." His voice matched the messages, low, careful, precise. "Lucien." They looked at each other for a long moment. Up close, he was harder to read than the photographs suggested. Sharp features, yes, but also exhaustion etched around his eyes. The kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much weight for too long. "You didn't have to come," he said finally. "I know. But you did anyway. I wanted to see if you were real." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "And?" Reina studied him. The way he held himself, the tension in his shoulders, the careful distance he maintained even while sitting close enough to touch. "You're real," she said. "You're also terrifying." "I know. That doesn't bother you?" "It's useful." Reina picked up her coffee, put it down without drinking. "I looked you up," she said, "after I figured out who you were. I assumed you would. The things they say about you, some of them are true." His honesty was like a blade. Reina leaned forward slightly. "Which ones?" Lucien met her eyes directly. "The ones that matter." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the cafe continued its normal rhythm, baristas calling orders, keyboards clicking, the low hum of Saturday morning humanity. "Why did you agree to meet me?" Reina asked finally. "Because you asked." "That's it?" "Nobody asks me for anything directly anymore. Everything's coded, negotiated, performed." He paused. "You just asked." Reina felt something shift in her chest, dangerous territory. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Lucien looked at her for a long time before answering. "I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." He leaned back slightly. "What do you want from me?" "Honesty." "You have it. Prove it." "How?" Reina thought about all the questions she'd accumulated over the past 3 weeks, all the gaps in his story, all the things he'd carefully avoided saying. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something you've never told anyone else." Lucien studied her face. Then he spoke quietly, each word deliberate. "I sleep 4 hours a week. I have 16 people whose job is to keep me alive. I don't trust any of them completely because trust is a liability in my world. I've spent the last 8 years building an empire my father left me, and every single day I wonder if it's worth what it costs." He paused. "And 3 weeks ago, I got a message from a wrong number that said I can't anymore, and for the first time in years, I heard something that sounded real." Reina's throat felt tight. "That's why you kept talking to me." "Yes. Because I didn't know who you were. Because you talked to me like I was human." The words hung between them, raw and undefended. Reina picked up her coffee again. This time she drank. "I still think this is a terrible idea," she said. "It is. I should walk away right now. Probably. But I'm not going to." Lucien's expression shifted, something that might have been relief or might have been fear. "Why not?" Reina set down her cup and looked at him directly. "Because I've spent my entire life studying the structures that hold people together, and I've never met anyone more in need of being seen for what they actually are instead of what they've built themselves into." Lucien went very still. "That's dangerous." "I know. For both of us." "I know that too." They sat there while the cafe moved around them and winter light filtered through the windows, and neither of them left. What? The relationship developed slowly after that, not because either of them wanted it to, but because Lucien's world made speed impossible. There were protocols, security measures, complications that Reina couldn't have imagined before stepping into the gravitational pull of his life. Silent bodyguards began appearing near her apartment building. Never close enough to be obvious, but always present. Watching. Strange luxury cars would idle too long outside her studio. Black SUVs with tinted windows that didn't match the neighborhood. Men stopped talking when she entered certain rooms. Lucien never apologized for the security. He simply made it clear that her safety was non-negotiable. Reina hated it and understood it simultaneously. The constant reminder that his world operated by different rules than hers. Their second meeting happened 2 weeks after the first in a private art gallery after hours. Lucien had arranged it somehow. The entire space empty except for the two of them, surrounded by abstract paintings that cost more than Reina's annual salary. "Do you like art?" she asked, looking at a canvas that was mostly red slashes against white. "I like what art lets people pretend about themselves," Lucien said. "That's cynical. That's honest." Reina turned to face him. "Do you ever just enjoy something without analyzing its function?" "No." "Why not?" "Because enjoyment is a luxury. Function is survival." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." They walked through the gallery slowly, their footsteps echoing on polished floors. Reina stopped in front of a sculpture, twisted metal forming something that might have been human or might have been abstract. "What do you see?" Lucien asked. Tension, control. Something trying very hard not to break apart. She glanced at him. "What do you see?" "The same thing I see in the mirror." Reina felt her breath catch. There it was again, that devastating honesty that made it impossible to look away. "Is that what you think you are?" she asked quietly. "Something barely holding together?" "Isn't everyone?" "No, most people allow themselves to fall apart occasionally. It's how they stay whole." Lucien looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I can't afford to fall apart." "Why not?" "Because people die when I do." The weight of that statement settled between them. Reina understood suddenly that she wasn't just talking to a man, she was talking to an entire infrastructure of violence and survival that depended on his absolute control. "That's a terrible way to live," she said finally. "Yes." "Do you want to live differently?" Lucien turned away from the sculpture, and for just a moment his carefully maintained armor cracked enough to show something underneath, something exhausted and human and desperate. "I don't know how," he admitted quietly. Reina reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched. Lucien looked down at their joined hands like she'd performed some kind of impossible magic. Like physical gentleness was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. "Neither do I," Reina said. "But maybe we figure it out together." The consequences started small. A phone call from her publisher, canceling their next project without clear explanation. A colleague who stopped returning emails. An invitation to a medical conference suddenly rescinded. Reina didn't connect the pieces immediately. Not until her agent called 3 weeks after her second meeting with Lucien, voice tight with something between anger and fear. "What have you done?" the agent demanded. Reina sat at her desk, pencil frozen above an illustration of the human brain's vascular system. "What are you talking about?" "Your name. It's connected to Lucien Moretti." Reina's stomach dropped. "How?" "Does it matter? The publishing houses know. The medical community knows. Everyone knows." A pause. "They're scared, Reina. Scared to work with you. Scared of the association." "That's insane. I'm an illustrator. I don't have anything to do with, say..." "It doesn't matter what you do or don't do. It matters who you're connected to. And Lucien Moretti is radioactive." The call ended shortly after. Reina sat in her studio while afternoon light died outside the window and watched her career begin crumbling in slow motion. When she told Lucien that night, he was silent for a long time. They were in his penthouse, the first time she'd been to his actual home rather than meeting in neutral territory. The space was exactly what she'd expected: expensive, immaculate, and completely impersonal. Like a hotel room for someone who never planned to stay. "I can fix this," he said finally. "How?" "I make a phone call. Your contracts get reinstated. Everything goes back to normal." Reina looked at him carefully. "And what does that cost?" "Nothing. I'd do it tonight." "No." Lucien turned. "Reina, no?" She stood up, crossing her arms. "I'm not going to let you solve my problems with fear and influence. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" "I rebuild my career myself. On my own terms." "That could take months, years." "Then it takes years." Lucien stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Why? He asked finally. Why make it harder than it has to be? Because if I let you fix it, then I'm just another person in your world who needs something from you. And that's not what this is. Something shifted in Lucien's expression, something that looked dangerously close to awe. Everyone in my life needs something from me, he said quietly. You're the first person who doesn't. I need honesty, Reina corrected. Everything else I can handle myself. She left shortly after that, taking the elevator down 43 floors, while her heart hammered and doubt crept in around the edges. Maybe she was being stupid. Maybe pride would destroy what little career she had left. But she couldn't let Lucien fix this, because the moment she did, their entire relationship would transform into something transactional, and that was the one thing she couldn't survive. Chad. The rebuilding happened slowly. Reina spent 6 weeks submitting portfolios to international publishers, medical schools, research institutions, anyone who might value skill over reputation. The rejections came fast and brutal. Most didn't bother responding at all. She worked day and night, producing some of the best illustrations of her career on nothing but spite and determination, drew until her hand cramped, refined until her eyes burned, and eventually something broke through. A prestigious European medical publisher offered her a massive contract, twice the size of anything she'd had before, for a comprehensive surgical atlas covering 17 different specialties. They didn't care about her connections. They cared about her work. When she told Lucien, he looked at her like she'd performed a miracle. They were in his car, one of the anonymous black sedans that seemed to multiply around him like shadows, driving through Manhattan near midnight. Rain streaked the windows, turning the city into abstract light. You did it, he said. I did it. Without my help. Yes. Lucien was quiet for several blocks, then, I've never met anyone like you. Good or bad? Terrifying. He glanced at her. Everyone in my life is either afraid of me or wants something from me. You're neither. I'm definitely afraid of you sometimes. But you stay anyway. Yes. Why? Reina looked out at the rain-soaked city, thought about all the careful ways she could answer that question safely. Instead, she chose honesty. Because I see you, she said simply. Not the empire, not the reputation, just you. And I don't want to stop looking. The car pulled over suddenly. They were on some anonymous street in the financial district, buildings rising dark around them like monuments to power and money. Lucien turned to face her fully. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to have something real without destroying it. Neither do I. Then we're both taking a massive risk. Yes. Lucien reached out slowly like he was approaching something fragile. His hand came to rest against the side of her face, fingers gentle, despite the violence they'd committed. I want you to understand something, he said quietly. My world is dangerous, not metaphorically, actually dangerous. People die, frequently, and if they know you matter to me, you become a target. I know. I'm serious, Reina. There are consequences. She kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't safe. It was desperate and terrifying and completely honest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lucien looked at her with something between wonder and fear. That was stupid, he said. Yes. We can't go back from this. I know. He kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing something he knew wouldn't last. Outside, rain continued falling on empty Manhattan streets, while somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Neither of them heard. The threat arrived 2 weeks later. Reina was working late in her studio when her phone rang from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She'd learned to be cautious about unexpected calls, but something made her pick up. Silence on the other end. Just breathing. Then a woman's voice, elegant and cold. You have 48 hours to leave him. The line went dead. Reina sat frozen, staring at her phone. Her hands were shaking. She called Lucien immediately. He answered on the first ring. What's wrong? I got a call. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. A threat. Where are you? My studio. Don't move. I'm sending someone. Lucien. Don't. Move. The security arrived 12 minutes later, two men in dark suits who politely asked her to come with them. Reina didn't argue. She grabbed her bag and followed them down to a waiting car. They drove her to Lucien's building through traffic that somehow parted around them like water. Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than conversation. Lucien was waiting when the elevator opened onto his penthouse floor. He looked at her once, conducting some kind of rapid assessment, then nodded to the security. "Thank you. Wait outside." The men disappeared. Lucien crossed the space between them in 3 strides and pulled Reina against him hard enough to hurt. She felt his heart hammering through his shirt. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said into her hair. Reina repeated the call word for word. When she finished, Lucien pulled back enough to look at her face. "This is my fault," he said flatly. "It's not. It is. They're using you to get to me." "Who?" "I don't know yet, but I'll find out." Something in his voice made Reina's skin go cold. This was the other side of Lucien. The part she'd known existed, but never seen directly. The part that solved problems with violence. "What are you going to do?" she asked carefully. "Make it stop." "How?" Lucien looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a visible decision. "Come with me." He led her through the penthouse to a door she'd never noticed before. It opened onto a private elevator that descended deeper than the ground floor. When the doors opened again, they were somewhere underneath the building, a space that felt more like a military installation than a residence. Steel doors, armed guards, the quiet efficiency of organized violence. Lucien walked through it all like it was normal, like underground fortresses were just part of the architecture of his life. They entered a conference room where 6 men were already waiting around a polished table. The conversation stopped the moment Lucien appeared. "Out," he said simply. The men left without question. Lucien pulled out a chair for Reina. She sat slowly, trying to process everything she was seeing. "This is the real machinery," Lucien said quietly. "This is what holds my world together." Reina looked around the room, at the monitors on the walls showing security feeds, at the phones and encrypted computers, at the casual evidence of a completely different kind of life. "How long has this existed?" she asked. "Since my father built it, before I was born." He sat down across from her. "I wanted you to see it, to understand what you're actually choosing." "Choosing? If you stay with me, this becomes part of your life too. The security, the threats, the constant surveillance. It doesn't end, Reina. It never ends." She heard what he wasn't saying, the unspoken offer to walk away now before things got worse. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand. "I understand," she said simply. "Do you?" "Yes." "And you're staying anyway?" "Yes." Lucien looked at their joined hands like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met," he said finally, "or the most reckless." "Maybe both." "Definitely both." The conference room door opened. One of the security men appeared. "Sir, we have information." Lucien stood immediately, his entire demeanor shifting into something harder and more dangerous. "Where?" "Third floor. The tech team isolated the call origin." "Show me." He glanced back at Reina. "Stay here. I'll be back in 20 minutes. But Reina stood up too. "I'm coming with you." "Reina, you wanted me to see the real machinery, remember? So show me." Something flickered across Lucien's face, concern maybe, or admiration, but he nodded. They took the elevator up 3 floors to a space filled with computers and monitors, where a team of 4 analysts tracked data streams Reina didn't understand. One of them, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes, gestured to a screen. "The call originated from a burner phone purchased 6 hours ago in Brooklyn," she said. "But the voice print matches someone in our database." "Who?" Lucien asked. The woman pulled up a photograph. Elegant, beautiful, cold eyes. "Sofia Castellano," the analyst said. "Former associate. Left the organization 8 months ago after—" She glanced at Reina, then back to Lucien. "After personal complications." Understanding crashed through Reina like cold water. "She was with you," she said quietly. Not a question. Lucien's jaw tightened. "Yes." "And now she's threatening me." "Yes." The analyst continued. She's been in contact with the Volkov organization. We think she's feeding them information. Lucian went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Find her, he said. I want eyes on her location within the hour. The team immediately bent to their screens. Lucian turned to Reyna. We need to talk. They walked back to the penthouse in silence. Once inside, Lucian poured himself a drink, something amber and expensive, and downed it in one motion. Sophia and I were together for 3 years, he said without preamble. It ended badly. I'm not going to lie about why. Tell me. She wanted more than I could give. Marriage, family, a version of this life that doesn't exist. He set down the glass. I couldn't be what she needed, so she left. And now she's targeting me. Yes. Reyna sat down on the edge of the couch, processing. How bad is this? She asked. Bad. If she's working with the Volkovs, he stopped, started again. They're rivals, violent ones, and if they think you're my weakness, they'll use you to destroy me. So what do we do? Lucien looked at her. We end this. Tonight. The way he said it made Reyna's blood run cold. What does that mean? She asked carefully. End it how? Lucien crossed the space between them and knelt in front of her, taking both her hands. I need you to trust me, he said. Can you do that? Reyna looked into his face, at the exhaustion and determination and fear living there simultaneously. Yes, she said. Then stay here. Don't leave this building. Don't answer calls from anyone except me. And whatever you hear, whatever people tell you, remember that I'm handling it. Lucien. He kissed her once, hard and desperate. Trust me, he repeated. Then he was gone. Reyna sat alone in the massive penthouse while night pressed against the windows, and somewhere in the city below, violence began unfolding in ways she could only imagine. She picked up a sketchbook from her bag. She always carried one, and started drawing. Not anatomy this time, just hands. 2 of them, holding each other despite everything, because that was the only thing keeping her steady. Reyna drew for 3 hours straight. Her hand moved across the page mechanically, rendering the same image over and over. 2 hands clasped together, knuckles white with pressure, fingers intertwined like they were the only thing keeping each other from drowning. She didn't think about what she was drawing, didn't analyze it. Just let her body do something familiar while her mind spun in circles, trying not to imagine what Lucien was doing out there in the dark. The penthouse was too quiet. She could hear the city through the windows, distant sirens, traffic, the low hum of New York refusing to sleep. But inside, the space felt like a tomb. Expensive furniture arranged with precision, art on the walls that probably cost more than she'd make in a decade. Everything perfect and cold and designed to reveal nothing about the person who lived here. Around midnight, she gave up on drawing and started pacing. The security team had positioned 2 men outside the penthouse door. She'd heard them talking in low voices earlier, radios crackling with coded communications she couldn't decipher. Every time footsteps approached in the hallway, her heart would spike, then crash when they passed without stopping. She wanted to call Lucien. She didn't. Trust me, he'd said. So she was trying. At 1:47 a.m., her phone buzzed. Reyna grabbed it so fast she nearly dropped it. Still awake? Lucien. She typed back immediately. Yes. Are you okay? I'm fine. It's handled. What does that mean? It means you're safe. I'll be back in an hour. Reyna stared at the message. It told her absolutely nothing while asking her to accept everything on faith. Lucien. Yes? Did someone get hurt? The pause before his response felt like falling. Yes. Who? People who deserved it. Reyna sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, phone trembling in her hands. She'd known, theoretically, what Lucien was capable of, known the kind of violence his world operated on, but knowing it abstractly and confronting it directly were 2 completely different things. She typed, Are you hurt? No. Promise? Promise. Okay. I'll wait. She set the phone down and pressed both hands against her face, trying to steady her breathing. This was the cost. This was what choosing him actually meant. Not just theoretical danger or abstract threats, but real violence committed in real time while she sat in a fortress waiting to find out if the man she was falling for had just killed someone. The hours stretched into 90 minutes before she heard the elevator arrive. Reyna stood up as Lucian walked through the door. He looked exhausted, shirt rumpled, hair disheveled, blood on his knuckles that he hadn't bothered to wash off yet. Their eyes met across the room. "It's not mine," he said quietly, glancing at his hands. "I know." He walked to the kitchen and ran water over his knuckles, scrubbing until the sink ran clear. Reyna watched from the doorway, not speaking, just present. When he finished, Lucien dried his hands slowly and turned to face her. "Sophia won't be a problem anymore," he said. "What did you do?" "Made it very clear what happens when someone threatens you." He paused. "She's alive, scared, but alive." "And the Volkovs?" Something darker crossed his face. "They're receiving a message." Reyna understood immediately that the message wasn't verbal. She crossed the kitchen and took Lucian's hands in hers, studying the abraded knuckles that were already starting to bruise. "I'm trying very hard not to ask for details," she said quietly. "Good. Don't. But I need you to tell me one thing honestly." "What?" "Do you regret what you did tonight?" Lucien looked at her for a long moment. Then, "No." "Why not?" "Because they were going to hurt you, and I'll burn this entire city down before I let that happen." The certainty in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, it just made her heart ache. "That's not healthy," she said. "I know. You can't solve everything with violence. I know that too." "Then why do you?" "Because it's the only language my world understands." He pulled his hands from hers gently. "I'm not a good man, Reyna. I'm trying to be honest with you about that. I've done things." He stopped, started again. "I've hurt people, killed people, destroyed lives because it was expedient or necessary, or sometimes just because I could. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm something other than what I am." "I'm not asking you to pretend." "Then what are you asking?" Reyna stepped closer, placing one hand against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering beneath the rumpled shirt. "I'm asking if you want to be something different," she said. "Not immediately, not magically, just eventually." Lucian covered her hand with his. "I don't know if I can be. But do you want to?" He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm while they stood together in the kitchen of a penthouse fortress at almost 3 a.m., having a conversation that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. "Yes," Lucien said finally, "but I don't know how." "Then we figure it out together." "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." Lucian pulled her against him suddenly, holding her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. Reyna felt the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion radiating through his entire frame. "You should sleep," she said against his chest. "I don't sleep much." "I know, but you should try." They moved to the bedroom, a space as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, all neutral colors and expensive fabrics that revealed nothing. Lucian pulled off his shirt and collapsed onto the bed fully dressed otherwise, closing his eyes like someone surrendering to something inevitable. Reyna lay down beside him, close, but not touching. Within 5 minutes, she could tell from his breathing that he wasn't asleep, just lying there with his eyes closed, mind racing through calculations and contingencies she couldn't begin to imagine. "Tell me something," she said quietly into the darkness. "Like what?" "Anything. Something true." Lucian was silent for a moment. Then, "When I was 12, my father took me to a warehouse where 3 men were tied to chairs. He handed me a gun and told me to choose which one lived." Reyna's breath caught. "Did you?" "No, I refused, so he shot all 3 and told me that my weakness had just killed them." A pause. "That was the day I learned that in my world, mercy is the same as murder." "That's a terrible thing to teach a child." "Yes." "Do you still believe it?" "I don't know. I believed it for 20 years. Then I met you, and suddenly everything I built my life on started looking like a prison instead of protection." Reyna reached out in the darkness and found his hand. "What if mercy isn't weakness?" she said. "What if it's just a different kind of strength?" "Then I've been doing everything wrong my entire life. Or maybe you're just ready to do things differently." Lucian squeezed her hand. "Go to sleep, Reyna." "Are you going to?" "Eventually." She didn't push, just held his hand in the darkness while exhaustion finally dragged her under. When she woke 6 hours later, Lucien was gone. What? The next 3 weeks felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. On the surface, everything appeared calm. Raina returned to her apartment, resumed work on her international contract, fell back into the rhythms of normal life. But underneath, she could feel the pressure building, security teams tracking her movements, encrypted phone calls at odd hours. The weight of Lucien's world pressing down on both of them like atmosphere before a storm. They saw each other when they could, which was never often enough and always complicated. Stolen afternoons in anonymous hotel rooms. Late dinners in restaurants where Lucien always sat facing the door. One night driving through Queens at 2 a.m. just to be moving, just to pretend they could go anywhere without planning and security and constant surveillance. The intimacy between them deepened in ways that felt both inevitable and terrifying. One night in late February, lying in bed in Raina's apartment after hours of not sleeping, Lucien told her about the first person he'd killed. "I was 19, he said, staring at the ceiling. There was a man who'd been embezzling from my father's operations. Small amounts at first, then larger. My father gave me a choice, handle it myself, or he'd assume I was too weak to take over when the time came." "So you killed him?" "Yes." "Do you remember it?" "Every second." Raina rolled onto her side to look at him. "Does it still bother you?" "No, that's what bothers me." He turned his head to meet her eyes. "The first one should haunt you, should keep you awake, should make you question everything. But after the first one, the others get easier. And that's the truly terrifying part, how quickly violence becomes normal." "Is it normal now?" "Yes." "Do you want it to be?" Lucien reached out and traced the line of her face with one finger, the gesture achingly gentle despite the hands that had committed so much brutality. "I want to be the person you see when you look at me," he said quietly. "But I don't know if that person actually exists." "He does. I've met him." "You've met the parts of me I show you. The rest, I know about the rest. I'm choosing to stay anyway." "That's insane." "Probably." Raina moved closer, fitting herself against him. "But I've spent my entire life studying how bodies hold together under pressure. And I think you've been holding together alone for too long." Lucien's arms came around her tight enough to hurt. "If this goes wrong," he said into her hair, "if my world destroys you, then we'll deal with it, together. You keep saying that word, because you need to hear it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, like two people trying to become one structure instead of two separate fragile things. But the hurricane was still coming. The warning arrived on a Tuesday morning while Raina was working. She'd been hunched over her desk for 3 hours, rendering the microscopic structures of cardiac tissue for a chapter on heart disease, when her apartment buzzer rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Lucien was in meetings all day, and deliveries always called first. She hit the intercom. "Yes?" Static, then a woman's voice, elegant and cold. "I need to speak with you. It's about Lucien." Raina's stomach dropped. "Who is this? Someone who knows him better than you think. Will you let me up, or would you prefer to have this conversation on the street?" Every instinct screamed not to open the door, but curiosity and something darker, the need to know what she was actually dealing with, won out. "Third floor," Raina said. She stood by the door, heart hammering, until the knock came. The woman on the other side was exactly what Raina expected, beautiful in that cold, maintained way that spoke of money and careful construction. Dark hair pulled back severely. Designer clothes that probably cost more than Raina's monthly rent. Eyes like chips of ice. Sofia Castellano. "Hello," Sofia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "May I come in?" Raina stepped aside. "What do you want?" Sofia walked into the apartment like she was inspecting it for flaws, taking in the cluttered work desk, the anatomical illustrations tacked to the walls, the general chaos of someone who lived alone and didn't care about impressing anyone. "Charming," she said, dripping with insincerity. "Cut the performance," Raina said. "You threatened me. Lucien dealt with it. So why are you here?" Sofia turned to face her fully. "To give you information he won't. I'm not interested in... He's going to get you killed." The words cut through the apartment like a blade. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably. Raina crossed her arms. That's dramatic. Is it? How many people do you think have died because of their association with Lucien Moretti? Actual number. I'll wait. I don't. 47. Sophia's voice was precise, clinical. In the last 8 years, associates, business partners, one girlfriend before me who made the mistake of being seen in public with him too often, people who became collateral damage because they stood too close to the target. Raina felt cold spreading through her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because I actually liked being alive. Sophia stepped closer. I was with him for 3 years. I loved him. Genuinely, stupidly loved him. And you know what I learned? Lucien Moretti doesn't have relationships. He has liabilities that he manages until they become too dangerous to keep. That's not... Let me finish. Sophia's composure cracked slightly, showing something raw underneath. 2 years into our relationship, there was a conflict with a rival organization. They kidnapped me, held me for 6 days while they negotiated with Lucien. Do you know what he did? Raina didn't answer. He didn't negotiate. He didn't pay ransom. He systematically destroyed their entire operation, killed everyone involved, and retrieved me like I was a piece of stolen property. Sophia's hands were shaking now. And when it was over, when I was traumatized and broken and terrified, he looked at me and said, "This is why I told you to stay away from my work." That doesn't... He blamed me for my own kidnapping, for making myself a target, and that's when I realized the truth. Lucien doesn't protect the people he cares about. He just controls the aftermath when they inevitably get hurt. Raina felt like the floor was tilting. Why should I believe you? Because I have no reason to lie. Sophia pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, then held it out. This is from 6 days ago. The photo showed Lucien in what looked like a warehouse. There was blood on his clothes, a body on the ground. His expression was completely empty. No rage, no emotion, just cold efficiency. That's what he did to the men who threatened you, Sophia said quietly. He didn't just scare them. He didn't make a point. He destroyed them because that's what he does. And sooner or later, someone's going to decide that the best way to hurt him is to hurt you. And when that happens, you'll understand exactly what kind of man you've chosen. Raina handed the phone back with shaking hands. Get out. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to punish him by taking away something he wants. Because he didn't love you the way you needed, and you can't accept that. Raina walked to the door and opened it. Whatever happened between you two, I'm sorry. But I'm not leaving him because you're bitter about how it ended. Sophia studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, a sad, knowing expression that made Raina's skin crawl. You will, she said simply. Maybe not today, maybe not next month. But eventually you'll realize that loving Lucien Moretti means dying by inches while he watches. And when you finally leave, you'll remember this conversation. She walked out without another word. Raina closed the door and leaned against it, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands were shaking. Her chest felt tight. She pulled out her phone and called Lucien. He answered immediately. What's wrong? Sophia was here, silent. Then, where are you? My apartment. Stay there. I'm coming now. The line went dead. Raina slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up, trying to process everything Sophia had said. The numbers, the photograph, the warning delivered with such absolute certainty. 47 people. Was that true? Was it exaggerated? Did it even matter? She thought about the blood on Lucien's knuckles, the empty expression in that photograph, the careful way he always positioned himself between her and potential danger, like she was something that needed constant protection. What if Sophia was right? What if this entire relationship was just a ticking clock counting down to inevitable catastrophe? 20 minutes later, Lucien burst through the door, looking like he'd run the entire way. His eyes scanned the apartment rapidly, checking for threats before landing on Raina still sitting on the floor. Are you hurt? He demanded. No. What did she say? Raina looked up at him. That loving you is going to get me killed. Lucien went very still. Did she threaten you? No. She just told me things. Raina stood slowly. About your past, about what happened to her, about a number that's apparently 47 people who died because of their association with you. That number is inflated. How inflated? Lucian's jaw tightened. It's 31, and most of them were criminal associates who knew the risks, not civilians. Most of them? Reina, how many were civilians, Lucian? How many were people like me? He looked away. 4. The number hit like a physical blow. 4 people died just because they knew you, Reina said quietly. 4 people who weren't part of your world, who didn't sign up for violence, who probably just wanted to live normal lives. Yes. And you think I should just accept that risk? No. Lucian crossed the space between them, taking her shoulders gently. I think you should run. I think you should block my number, move cities, forget you ever met me. Because Sophia's right, staying with me is dangerous, and I can't promise you'll survive it. Then why did you come here? Because you called. That's not an answer. Because I'm selfish. His voice cracked slightly. Because even though I know I should let you go, I can't make myself do it. Because for the first time in my life, I've found someone who makes me want to be different. And the thought of losing you is worse than anything my enemies could do to me. Reina looked into his face, saw the exhaustion and fear and desperate honesty living there. Show me, she said. What? The photograph. The one Sophia showed me. The warehouse. Reina, if we're doing this, if I'm staying, then I need to see all of you, not just the parts you think I can handle. All of it. Lucian stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, and held it out. The image was worse than Reina remembered. More blood. More bodies. Lucien's expression completely empty in a way that was somehow more terrifying than rage. She forced herself to look at it fully, to not flinch away. Is this who you are? She asked quietly. It's part of who I am. Do you regret it? The violence? No. What I was protecting? Never. Reina handed the phone back. Her hands were steady now. Okay, she said. Okay. I'm staying. You just saw, I saw you protecting someone you care about in the only way you know how. It's brutal. It's terrifying, but it's honest. She stepped closer. I'm not naive, Lucian. I know what you're capable of. I've known since the beginning, and I'm choosing this anyway. Why? Because I've spent my entire career studying how structures break under pressure, and I think you've been on the verge of breaking for years. And maybe, I can be the thing that helps hold you together instead of watching you collapse. Lucian pulled her against him hard enough to hurt, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you, he said roughly. Probably not, but you have me anyway. They stood like that for a long time while traffic sounds filtered up from the street below, and the afternoon light died slowly outside the windows. When Lucy Tien finally pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I need to tell you something, he said, about what's coming. Reina's stomach tightened. What do you mean? The Volkovs, the message I sent them after Sophia's threat. They're not going to take it quietly. What are they going to do? Retaliate, soon, and when they do, it's going to be brutal. How brutal? Lucian looked at her steadily. The kind that ends with bodies in the river. Reina felt cold flooding through her chest. Can you stop it? Maybe, but it's going to require me to do things that will change how you see me. Worse than what I've already seen? Yes. She thought about that. About blood in warehouses and empty expressions and violence committed with surgical precision. Will people die? She asked. Probably. People who deserve it? That depends on your definition of deserve. Lucian's voice was careful, measured. In my world, deserve means choosing to play a game where the stakes are life and death. In yours, it probably means something different. Will innocence die? Not if I can help it. But I can't promise you clean hands, Reina. I can't promise you that everyone who gets hurt will be someone who asked for it. She processed that, the brutal honesty of it, the refusal to sugarcoat or perform moral certainty he didn't feel. What do you need from me? She asked finally. Permission to keep you safe however I need to. What does that mean? It means you stay in secure locations. It means you don't argue when I send security. It means you trust me when I tell you something's dangerous. He paused. And it means you don't ask me for details about what I'm doing to end this. Because you don't want me to know? Because I don't want you to have to carry it. Raina looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. Okay, but one condition. What? You don't lie to me, ever, even about the ugly parts. Even if the truth makes you leave? Even then. Lucian kissed her forehead gently. Deal. The war started 3 days later. Raina was in Lucian's penthouse. She'd been staying there at his insistence since Sophia's visit, when the first reports came in. She was sketching at the dining table, trying to focus on work while security moved like ghosts in the background, when Lucien's phone rang. She watched his expression shift as he listened, watched the careful control slide into place like armor. When? He asked. A pause. How many? Another pause. Lock it down. I'm on my way. He hung up and looked at Raina. I have to go. What happened? The Volkovs just hit one of our operations. 5 casualties. Raina felt her stomach drop. Your people? Yes. Are you going there? I have to respond. If I don't, it looks like weakness, and weakness gets more people killed. What are you going to do? Lucian crossed to her, cupped her face gently. Nothing you need to carry. Stay here. Don't leave. I'll have 4 men outside the door and 2 on each elevator. When will you be back? I don't know. Could be hours, could be all night. Lucian, he kissed her, hard and desperate. I love you, he said against her mouth. It was the first time either of them had said it. Raina's breath caught. What? I love you, and I need you to know that in case... He stopped. Just know it. Then he was gone. Raina sat frozen at the table, heart hammering. The words echoed in her head like a bell that couldn't stop ringing. I love you. Said like a confession, like an apology, like a goodbye. She tried to return to her sketching and couldn't. Tried to read and couldn't focus. Tried to sleep and lay awake staring at the ceiling while her mind spun through scenarios she couldn't control. The hours crawled past. At 11 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Turn on the news. Raina grabbed the remote with shaking hands and turned on the television. The headline made her blood run cold. Multiple casualties in suspected organized crime. Violence across Manhattan. The footage showed fire trucks and police cars surrounding a warehouse in Brooklyn. Ambulances with lights flashing. Body bags being loaded into vans. The reporter's voice cut through the chaos. At least 9 confirmed dead in what appears to be an escalating conflict between rival criminal organizations. Police are not releasing names at this time, but sources suggest... Raina's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Hello? Your boyfriend's body count is up to 9 tonight. The voice was male, accented, coldly amused. How does it feel to fuck a monster? The line went dead. Raina dropped the phone like it had burned her. 9 people dead. 9 people who woke up this morning and went about their lives and now weren't coming home. Because of Lucienne. Because of her. Because of a war that kept escalating with no clear end. She thought about what Sophia had said, about the inevitable cost of standing beside him. She thought about the photograph, about blood in warehouses, about violence committed with empty expressions. She thought about, I love you said like a confession. At 2:30 a.m., the penthouse door opened. Raina was sitting on the couch, television still playing, unable to move or think or process anything anymore. Lucien walked in looking like he'd aged 10 years in one night. There was blood on his clothes again, soot smudged across his face. His hands were shaking slightly. Their eyes met across the room. I saw the news, Raina said quietly. Lucien nodded slowly. It's over. For tonight. 9 people are dead. Yes. Did you kill them? Some of them. Did they deserve it? I don't know anymore. He moved to the kitchen sink, started washing his hands mechanically. They were coming for us. For my people. For you. So I ended it the only way I know how. By killing them. Yes. Reyna stood up slowly, walked to where he stood at the sink, still scrubbing his hands, even though they were already clean. Look at me, she said. Lucien turned. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight of too many decisions made in too little time, the cracks showing through his carefully maintained control. I meant what I said earlier, he told her. I love you, and I'm sorry that loving me comes with this much blood. Reyna took his hands and dried them gently with a kitchen towel. Tell me something, she said. If you could walk away from all of this tomorrow, the empire, the violence, the constant war, would you? Lucien looked at her for a long time. I don't know how to be anything else. That's not what I asked. Yes, I would walk away, but it's not that simple. You don't just leave my world. You negotiate your exit with blood, or you don't leave at all. Then negotiate. What? Find a way out. Not overnight, not magically, but start moving towards something different. She held his hands tighter. Because Sophia was right about one thing. This pace is unsustainable, and eventually it's going to destroy you, destroy us, destroy everything you've built. You're asking me to dismantle an empire. I'm asking you to choose what matters more. Lucien stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language, like the concept of choice was something he'd forgotten existed. If I start dismantling, he said slowly, people will see weakness. They'll move against me, against you. Then we'll deal with it together. You keep saying that word, because I mean it. Reyna stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat through his blood-stained shirt. I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I'm asking you to become someone you could be. Someone who doesn't have to carry 9 bodies on his conscience every time he tries to keep people safe. That person might not exist. He does. I've met him, late at night when you think no one's watching. In quiet moments when you let yourself be human instead of untouchable. She pressed one hand against his chest. He's in there, underneath all the armor and violence and carefully maintained control. And I think he's exhausted. Lucien's composure finally cracked. He pulled her against him and just held on, shaking slightly, breathing like someone who'd been underwater too long and finally found air. I don't know how to do this, he said against her hair. Neither do I, but we figure it out. Together. Yes. They stood like that for a long time while the city outside continued its relentless rhythm, and somewhere across Manhattan, 9 families were learning that someone they loved wasn't coming home. The cost kept accumulating, and Reyna was finally understanding what it meant to love someone whose world operated on violence and survival instead of mercy and hope. The next morning, Lucien made a phone call that would change everything. Reyna was in the shower when it happened. She came out to find him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone in hand, staring out at the city with an expression she'd never seen before. What is it? She asked. I just initiated a negotiation, he said quietly. With who? Everyone. He turned to face her. The Volkovs, the other families. The federal investigation that's been circling for the past 6 months. I'm calling a summit. Reyna felt her heart skip. What does that mean? It means I'm offering to restructure everything, dissolve certain operations, create clear boundaries, give the federals what they need to close their investigation without destroying everything completely. He paused. It's the first step toward what you asked for last night. Why now? Because 9 people died yesterday, and I realized something. He crossed to her, taking both her hands. I've spent my entire life building an empire that I inherited from my father. His vision, his violence, his way of surviving, and I never stopped to ask if it's actually what I want. What do you want? Lucien looked at her steadily. A life where I sleep more than 4 hours a week, where I don't have to calculate survival probabilities before having coffee, where the woman I love doesn't watch the news wondering if I'm one of the body bags. He squeezed her hands. I want something different, and you made me believe it might be possible. Reyna felt tears burning behind her eyes. This is going to be dangerous. Yes. People are going to see it as weakness. Probably. They're going to come for you. Let them. Lucien, I'm serious. His voice was steady, certain. I've spent 20 years being afraid of appearing weak, afraid of losing control, afraid of what happens if I show any vulnerability. And you know what? I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from the constant war. Exhausted from carrying my father's empire like it's the only thing that matters. Exhausted from being the person everyone fears instead of the person anyone actually knows. What if it doesn't work? What if they refuse to negotiate? Then I fight. But at least I'll be fighting for something that matters instead of just fighting to survive another day. Reina pulled him into a fierce hug, holding on tight. I'm terrified, she admitted. Me too. But I'm also proud of you. For what? For choosing something other than violence. She pulled back to look at him. I know it's not over. I know there's still going to be blood and danger and impossible choices. But this, what you just did, this is brave. It's not brave. It's selfish. I'm doing this because I want you more than I want the Empire. That's the same thing. They stood together while morning light filled the penthouse, and somewhere across the city, Lucian's phone call was rippling through networks of power and violence, setting in motion changes that couldn't be undone. The point of no return had arrived, and they'd stepped over it together. The summit was set for 72 hours later. Neutral ground, a hotel conference room in Midtown, heavily secured, with federal observers present to prevent immediate violence. Representatives from 5 major organizations, including the Volkovs, Lucien's entire strategic team, and lawyers. So many lawyers. Reina wasn't allowed to attend, which was probably for the best. Instead, she spent the 3 days before the summit watching Lucien prepare like someone going to war. Strategy meetings that lasted until 3 a.m., encrypted calls in multiple languages, documents spread across every surface of the penthouse, the careful calculation of what he was willing to sacrifice versus what he refused to give up. One night, she found him standing by the windows at dawn, staring out at the city, clearly not having slept. You should rest, she said. Can't. Too much to organize. Reina crossed to him, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. What are you thinking about? She asked. That 72 hours from now, I'm either going to have negotiated a new structure that might actually lead somewhere better, he paused, or I'm going to have started a war that makes the past week look like a minor disagreement. Which do you think is more likely? Honestly? The war. He turned in her arms to face her. The Volkovs aren't interested in peace. They're interested in expanding territory, and offering them structured boundaries is just going to make them push harder. Then why do it? Because I need to try. Because if I can succeed, if I can actually create something sustainable, then maybe the next generation doesn't have to live the way I have. He cupped her face gently. And because you made me want to try. Reina kissed him softly. Whatever happens, she said, we deal with it together. Even if it's catastrophic, even then. The morning of the summit arrived cold and brittle, winter sunlight cutting through Manhattan like broken glass. Lucien left the penthouse at 7 a.m., surrounded by security, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that made him look like he was going to either a business meeting or a funeral. Possibly both. He kissed Reina at the elevator. Stay here, he said. Don't leave for any reason. I'll have 8 men on rotation outside and full surveillance on every entrance. When will you be back? I don't know. The summit could last hours, could last days. Lucien, I love you, he said. Remember that. Whatever happens today, whatever you hear, just remember that. Then he was gone. Reina spent the morning trying to work and failing. Trying to distract herself and failing. Trying not to imagine every possible catastrophic outcome and failing spectacularly at that too. Around 11 a.m., her phone buzzed. Text from Lucien. First session just ended. Still alive. They're actually listening. Relief flooded through her so intensely she had to sit down. She texted back, That's good, right? Too early to tell. But it's not violence yet. I'll take it. The afternoon crawled past. Reina sketched mechanically, trying to keep her hands busy. The security team outside changed shifts at 2 p.m. with military precision. The television stayed on with the sound muted, news channels cycling through their standard rotation of tragedy and politics. At 4:17 p.m., everything changed. The newsfeed suddenly cut to breaking coverage. A reporter standing outside a Midtown hotel, police cars with lights flashing behind her. Reina grabbed the remote and turned up the sound. Reports of gunfire inside the hotel where alleged organized crime figures were meeting earlier today. Police are evacuating the building now, but details remain unclear. At least one person has been confirmed dead, with multiple injuries. Reina's phone slipped from her hands. The hotel on the screen was the Summit location. Gunfire. At least one dead. Her phone buzzed on the floor. She grabbed it with shaking hands. Text from unknown number. He's still breathing. For now. Reina's vision blurred. She tried calling Lucien straight to voicemail, tried texting. No response. The security team outside the door suddenly started moving, radios crackling urgently. One of them knocked. Ms. Vale, we need to relocate you immediately. What happened? There was an incident at the summit, details unclear, but protocol requires, is Lucien alive? The guard's expression was carefully neutral. Unknown at this time, ma'am. Please pack a bag. We're leaving in 3 minutes. Reina's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She grabbed her sketchbook, her phone, whatever clothes were within reach, shoving them into a bag while her mind spun through scenarios she couldn't control. Gunfire. At least one dead. He's still breathing, for now. The security team moved her through the building like a chess piece. 2 men in front, 2 behind, elevators diverted to private routes, basement exits, a car already waiting with the engine running. They were pulling into traffic when her phone finally rang. Lucienne. She answered so fast she nearly dropped it again. Are you okay? I'm alive. His voice was strained, rough. Are you safe? The security team just relocated me. What happened? The Volkovs brought guns to a negotiation. It went exactly as badly as you'd imagine. A pause. I need you to listen very carefully. Okay. There's a situation developing. The summit failed, violently, and now everyone's scrambling to either retaliate or protect themselves before the next wave hits. How bad? War. Actual war. Every organization choosing sides right now. By midnight, this city's going to be a battlefield. Reina felt cold spreading through her chest. Where are you? Somewhere safe, with half my security team dead and the other half trying to figure out how we survived. His voice cracked slightly. This is my fault. I pushed for the summit. I thought negotiation was possible, and people died because I was naive enough to believe in something other than violence. Lucienne, no. 3 of my people are dead, Reina. Good people. People who trusted me. And for what? To prove that I could be something different? To make you proud? A bitter laugh. All I proved is that Sophia was right. My world doesn't allow for mercy or compromise. It only understands blood. That's not true. I have to go. The team needs decisions. But Reina, he paused. If something happens to me tonight, if this goes wrong, I need you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, even if it ends badly, even if... The line went dead. Reina stared at her phone, heart hammering. The car accelerated through traffic while the security team communicated in tense, clipped sentences she couldn't fully follow. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, completely unaware that underneath the surface, violence was about to erupt on a scale that would make the past week look like a preview. And somewhere in that chaos, Lucien was fighting to survive a war he'd accidentally started by trying to choose something other than what he'd always been. Reina pressed her hand against the car window and thought about all the ways love could destroy you. Then she made a decision. Stop the car, she said. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Ma'am, we can't. Stop the car, now. The lead security agent turned. Ms. Vale, our orders are clear. I don't care about your orders. Reina's voice was steady despite her shaking hands. Take me to Lucien, right now. That's not protocol. Do I look like I give a fuck about protocol? The man I love just told me he might die tonight, so you have 2 choices. Drive me to him, or I get out at the next light and find him myself. The agents exchanged glances. Then the lead agent nodded once. Redirect to primary location. Full escort. If anyone asks, this was her decision, not ours. The car changed course, merging into faster traffic while sirens began wailing somewhere in the distance. Reina didn't know what she was going to do when she got there. Didn't know if she could help or if she was just making everything worse. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Lucien was going to face this war, he wasn't going to face it alone. Even if staying with him meant stepping directly into fire. Together, she'd said. So together it would be. Even at the point of no return, the car cut through Manhattan traffic like a blade through water, sirens wailing somewhere close. The city's normal rhythm fracturing into something that felt like anticipation before an explosion. Raina sat in the back seat with her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms, watching streetlights blur past while the security team communicated in terse code she couldn't decipher. ETA 7 minutes, the driver said. Where are we going? Raina asked. The lead agent, Marcus, she thought his name was, turned slightly. Secondary operations facility, Lower Manhattan. It's fortified. Is Lucien there? Yes, ma'am. The car took a corner hard enough that Raina had to brace herself against the door. Outside, the streets were emptier than they should be at this hour. Like the city itself could sense the violence building underneath its surface and was holding its breath. They pulled into an underground parking structure that looked like it belonged to a standard commercial building. But the moment they descended past the second level, everything changed. Armed guards at checkpoints, reinforced steel doors, security cameras tracking every angle. The car stopped at a barrier where two men with rifles approached to verify credentials before waving them through. Marcus opened Raina's door. Stay close. Don't speak to anyone except Mr. Moretti. She followed him through a maze of concrete corridors lit by harsh fluorescent lights, her footsteps echoing too loud, heart hammering against her ribs. Every person they passed looked tense, coiled, ready for violence. They reached a heavy door guarded by 3 men. Marcus nodded to them and pushed it open. The room beyond was chaos barely contained. 20 people moving through organized disorder, laptops open on tables, phones pressed to ears, voices overlapping in multiple languages. Maps spread across walls, security feeds playing on mounted screens. The machinery of Lucien's empire laid bare and operating at maximum capacity. Lucien stood at the center of it all. He was bent over a table covered in documents, phone pressed to his ear, giving rapid instructions in Italian. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, blood smeared across his forearm, whether his or someone else's, Raina couldn't tell. He looked like he'd aged a decade since she'd seen him that morning. Then he turned and saw her. The phone dropped from his hand. "What the fuck are you doing here?" he demanded, crossing the room in 4 strides. His hands went to her shoulders, not gently. "I gave explicit orders." "I'm not following your orders," Raina said steadily. "Not about this." "Raina, this is a goddamn war zone." "I know, that's why I'm here." Lucien looked at Marcus with an expression that could have cut glass. "I told you to take her to the safe house in Brooklyn." "She insisted, sir, made it clear she'd find her own way if we didn't comply." "So you brought her directly into the most dangerous location in Manhattan?" "Sir, get out. All of you. Now." The room emptied in seconds, doors closing behind the exodus of personnel until only Lucien and Raina remained surrounded by the detritus of operational planning. Lucien turned on her, fury and fear warring across his features. "You can't be here," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Do you understand what's happening right now? The Volkovs have called for open war. 3 other families are choosing sides. The Federals are circling, and anyone connected to me is a target." "I know." "Then why—" He stopped, hands going to his hair in frustration. "Why would you walk directly into this?" "Because you told me you might die tonight." Raina stepped closer, refusing to flinch under the intensity of his stare. "And I'm not going to sit in some safe house wondering if the man I love is bleeding out somewhere while I hide." "That's exactly what you should do. That's the smart play." "I don't care about the smart play." "Well, I do." Lucien's voice cracked slightly. "Because 3 of my people died today. Good people who trusted me to make smart decisions. And I can't—" He turned away, shoulders tense. "I can't add you to that list. I won't survive it." Raina moved around to face him, placing both hands against his chest. "Then don't make decisions that get either of us killed," she said quietly. "We survive this together, or we don't survive it at all." Lucien looked down at her with an expression that was equal parts devastation and something that might have been hope. "You're insane," he said. "Probably. This isn't some romantic gesture. People are going to die tonight. Maybe me. Maybe you. Maybe both of us. I know. And you're staying anyway." "Yes." He pulled her against him suddenly, holding on like she was the only stable thing in a collapsing world. Reyna felt the tremor running through him, exhaustion and fear, and too many decisions made with inadequate information. I tried, he said into her hair. I actually tried to do this differently, to negotiate, to build something sustainable, and it blew up in my face so spectacularly that people died. That's not your fault. It's exactly my fault. I pushed for the summit. I believed negotiation was possible. I was naive enough to think. He pulled back, looking at her with something raw and broken in his expression. Sophia was right. My world doesn't allow for anything except violence, and I'm an idiot for thinking I could change that. You're not an idiot, you're just human. In my world, being human gets you killed. Before Reyna could respond, the door burst open. A man she didn't recognize, mid-40s, expensive suit, face like carved stone, strode in with an urgency that made her stomach clench. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Lucien released Reyna immediately, his entire demeanor shifting into the cold efficiency she'd seen in photographs. What kind of problem? The kind where we just intercepted communications suggesting there's a leak inside the organization. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. What communications? Lucien's voice was deadly quiet. The man, clearly a high-ranking lieutenant, pulled out a tablet and handed it over. Encrypted messages between a Volkov operative and someone inside our network. They have details about tonight's defensive positions, access codes, personnel rotations, everything. Lucien scrolled through the data, his expression growing darker with each screen. When was this sent? 30 minutes ago. From where? That's the problem. The signal originated from this building. Silence crashed through the space like a physical force. Reyna watched Lucien's hands tighten on the tablet, knuckles going white. You're telling me, he said, each word precise and controlled, that someone in this facility, someone with access to our entire security infrastructure, is actively feeding intelligence to the Volkovs. Yes, sir. Who? Unknown. But the timing suggests it's someone senior, someone who would have been at the summit. Lucien's jaw clenched so hard Reyna could see the muscle jumping. He looked up at the lieutenant with eyes that had gone completely cold. Lock down the building. No one in or out. I want every communication device confiscated and every person accounted for. Now. Yes, sir. The lieutenant left, already issuing orders into his radio. Lucien set down the tablet with carefully controlled movements, like he was afraid of what he might do if he lost even a fraction of composure. How bad is this? Reyna asked quietly. Catastrophic. He looked at her. If the Volkovs have our defensive positions, they can hit us where we're weakest. And if this leak has been active for longer than 30 minutes, if they've been feeding information for days or weeks, then everything we think we know about our security is compromised. Can you find them? I'll find them. The certainty in his voice was absolute and terrifying. And when I do, I'm going to make an example that ensures no one ever considers betraying this organization again. The door opened again. This time, 3 people entered, 2 men and a woman, all wearing the same expression of controlled tension. The building is locked down, the woman reported. 47 personnel currently on site. Communications confiscated. Everyone's being held in the main operations room. Good. Lucien straightened, his entire bearing transforming into something harder. Assemble everyone. I want them in the conference room in 5 minutes. All of them? Every single person. The 3 lieutenants exchanged glances but didn't argue. They left to execute the order. Lucien turned to Reyna. I need you to stay in this room. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me. What are you going to do? Find the leak. How? By asking questions until someone breaks. He crossed to her, cupping her face. This is going to get ugly, possibly violent, and I need you nowhere near it. Lucien, promise me. Promise you'll stay here. Reyna looked into his eyes and saw something that made her chest tight. Not just determination, desperation. The look of someone about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. Okay, she said quietly. I promise. He kissed her once, hard, desperate, like goodbye, then walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Reyna stood alone in the empty operations room, surrounded by maps and screens and the evidence of an empire trying to hold itself together against impossible odds. She should have stayed in the safe house. She knew that now. But it was too late for should-haves. Perhaps. The minutes crawled past like hours. Raina paced the small room, unable to sit still, mind spinning through scenarios she couldn't control. Through the walls, she could hear muffled voices, raised, angry, punctuated by periods of tense silence. She checked her phone compulsively. No service. They'd probably jammed the signals when they locked down the building. 30 minutes after Lucian left, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A single gunshot, then shouting, then nothing. Raina pressed her ear against the door, heart hammering. She could hear movement in the corridor outside. Footsteps. Radios crackling, the organized chaos of people responding to violence. She should stay in the room, she'd promised. But that gunshot. The door handle rattled suddenly. Raina jumped back, every instinct screaming. "Raina, it's Marcus. Open the door." She recognized his voice, the lead security agent from earlier. She unlocked the door slowly. Marcus stood in the hallway looking pale and tense. "What happened?" Raina demanded. "I heard a shot." "Mr. Moretti needs you in the conference room." "Why? What's going on?" "Just come with me, please." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. This wasn't a request. Raina followed him through corridors that felt different now, oppressive, threatening, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. They passed armed guards positioned at intervals. Nobody spoke. Nobody met her eyes. The conference room door was open. Marcus gestured for her to enter. Raina stepped through and immediately understood why the building felt like it was suffocating. Lucian stood at the head of a long table. His shirt was splattered with blood, fresh blood, still wet. His expression was completely empty in the way that terrified her most. Around the table, 47 people sat in rigid silence, faces ranging from terrified to furious, and on the floor against the far wall, crumpled and not moving, was a body. Raina's vision blurred at the edges. Lucien's eyes met hers across the space. "I found the leak," he said quietly. Raina looked at the body. Male, mid-30s, someone she didn't recognize but who clearly everyone else in the room knew. "Who was he?" she managed. "Antonio Reeves, one of my senior strategists. Been with the organization for 8 years. Lucien's voice was flat, emotionless. He's been selling information to the Volkovs for 6 months, fed them details about the summit, about our defensive positions, about everyone in this room. Is he... Raina couldn't finish the sentence. Dead? Yes. The casual confirmation made her knees weak. Lucien gestured to an empty chair beside him. Sit. I don't... Sit. Down. The command in his voice left no room for argument. Raina moved on autopilot, sinking into the chair while her mind tried to process what she was seeing. Lucien addressed the room, his voice carrying with absolute authority. I brought Ms. Vale here because I want all of you to understand something very clearly. He paused, letting the silence stretch. This organization has survived for 40 years because it operates on 2 principles: loyalty and consequence. Loyalty is rewarded. Betrayal is eliminated. No exceptions, no mercy, no second chances. He gestured to the body against the wall. Antonio violated that principle. He sold intelligence that resulted in the deaths of 3 of our people today. He endangered every person in this room. He chose profit over loyalty. Lucien's eyes swept across the assembled faces. This is what happens when you make that choice. The silence in the room was absolute. I want Ms. Vale to witness this, Lucien continued, because she represents something I've been trying to build. Something different. Something sustainable that doesn't require constant violence to maintain. His voice grew harder. But I also need her to understand that this world, my world, doesn't allow for weakness. And anyone who thinks they can exploit that weakness will end up exactly like Antonio. Raina felt like she couldn't breathe. This wasn't the man she'd fallen in love with. This was the monster everyone warned her about. The empty-eyed enforcer who solved problems with bullets and called it necessary. Lucien turned to her finally. Do you understand now? He asked quietly. Do you see why I tried to keep you away from this? Raina stared at him, at the blood on his shirt, at the corpse 10 feet away, at the 47 terrified faces watching this exchange like their lives depended on her response. Yes, she said, voice barely above a whisper. And do you still want to stay? It was a test. She understood that immediately. A challenge issued in front of witnesses. Accept what he was, completely and without reservation, or walk away and prove Sophia right. Reina looked at the body, at the blood, at the evidence of violence committed without hesitation. Then she looked at Lucien and saw something underneath the empty expression, something desperate and broken and asking for understanding he didn't think he deserved. Yes, she said clearly. I still want to stay. Something flickered across Lucien's face, relief maybe, or horror that she'd actually chosen this. He addressed the room again. Everyone back to your stations. We're implementing new protocols immediately. Every communication gets triple verification. Every movement gets logged. And if anyone so much as thinks about selling information, remember Antonio. The room emptied rapidly, people filing past the body without looking at it, faces carefully neutral. Within minutes, only Lucien, Reina, and 2 security guards remained. Lucien looked at the guards. Get that cleaned up and sweep his apartment. I want to know exactly how deep this went. Yes, sir. The guards moved to handle the body with practiced efficiency. Reina turned away, unable to watch. Lucien took her arm gently and led her out of the conference room, back to the smaller operations space they'd been in earlier. Once inside, he closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking 10 years older. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For making you see that. For bringing you into this. For... He stopped, hands going to his face. For proving that Sophia was right about everything. Reina crossed to him slowly. What did she say? That I'm incapable of love without destruction. That everyone who gets close to me either dies or gets destroyed by association. He lowered his hands. And she was right, because now you've watched me kill someone and there's no going back from that. Did he deserve it? Does it matter? Yes, it does. Lucien looked at her steadily. He sold information that got 3 people killed. He was planning to give the Volkovs our defensive positions, which would have gotten dozens more killed tonight. And he did it for money, not ideology, not coercion, just profit. He paused. So yes, by every measure that matters in my world, he deserved it. Then why are you apologizing? Because you shouldn't have to witness that kind of violence. You shouldn't have to accept it as normal. And you definitely shouldn't have to stand in a room full of criminals and tell them you're choosing to stay with the man who just executed someone. Reina took his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. I'm not staying with the man who executed someone, she said clearly. I'm staying with the man who's trying desperately to build something different while being trapped in a world that only understands violence. Those are not the same thing. They feel the same right now. I know, but they're not. Lucien pulled her against him, holding on with a desperation that made her ribs ache. I don't know how to do this, he said into her hair. I don't know how to be both the person you need and the person my world requires. Maybe you don't have to be both. Maybe... The door burst open, Marcus again, looking even more tense than before. Sir, we have a situation. Lucien released Reina immediately. What now? The Volkovs, they're moving. We've got intelligence suggesting they're planning coordinated strikes against 4 of our locations simultaneously. When? Within the hour. Lucien was moving before Marcus finished speaking, crossing to the table covered in maps and documents. Which locations? Marcus pointed to 4 spots on a map of Manhattan. The warehouse in Red Hook, the financial office in Tribeca, the safe house in Chelsea, and this facility. Confirmation? 3 separate sources, all reliable. Lucien studied the map with the focused intensity of someone doing complex mathematics in real time. If they hit all 4 simultaneously, we can't defend them adequately. We don't have the personnel. We could evacuate and look weak, which invites more attacks. Lucien's jaw clenched. How many people are at each location? Red Hook has 12. Tribeca has 8. Chelsea has 15. Here we have 43 remaining. So 78 people total spread across 4 locations that are all about to become targets. Lucien pressed both hands flat against the table. We need to consolidate. Bring everyone here. Sir, if they're targeting this facility specifically, then we make it the fortress it's designed to be. This building has fortifications the others don't. And if we're going to make a stand, we do it from the position of maximum strength. That gives them a single target instead of 4.
Yes. Which means we know exactly where the fight's happening instead of spreading our forces thin trying to defend multiple locations. Lucian looked up. Make the call. Everyone converges here within 30 minutes. And get me updated intelligence on the Volkov forces. How many, what weapons, what their likely approach vectors are.
Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Sir, respectfully, if this intelligence is accurate and they're planning coordinated strikes, they might have the manpower to actually take this facility. We're talking about an all-out assault. I know. People will die. People are already dead. Lucien's voice was ice. At least this way, we're dying on our terms instead of theirs. Marcus nodded and left, radio already pressed to his mouth. Lucien turned to Reyna. I need you to make a choice. What choice? I can have Marcus take you out through the emergency tunnels, get you to a safe location before this starts. Or, he paused, or you stay. But if you stay, you understand that this facility is about to become a war zone. Actual bullets, actual casualties, no performance, just survival. Reyna looked at him, at the exhaustion and determination and fear he was barely holding together. How bad is this going to be? She asked. Honestly, I don't know if we'll win. What happens if you lose? Then the Volkovs take over our operations, absorb our territory, and execute anyone senior enough to be considered a threat. He met her eyes directly. Including me. And me? I don't know. They might use you as leverage. They might kill you outright. Or they might let you go if you swear you'll never speak about what you've seen. He crossed to her, taking her shoulders. Which is why you need to leave. Right now, before the window closes. Reyna thought about everything she'd witnessed in the past 6 hours. The body in the conference room, the blood on Lucien's shirt, the desperate mathematics of trying to defend 4 locations with inadequate forces. She thought about, I love you said like a confession. She thought about together. No, she said. Reyna, I'm not leaving. If you're making a stand here, then I'm making it with you. That's insane. Probably. But I'm not walking away, not now, not when... Her voice cracked. Not when you might actually need someone who sees you as human instead of just a weapon. Lucien stared at her like she'd performed an impossible miracle. You're going to get yourself killed, he said quietly. Maybe. But at least I'll die knowing I didn't abandon someone I love when it mattered most. He pulled her into a fierce kiss, desperate and terrifying and completely honest. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucien pressed his forehead against hers. If we survive this, he said, I'm taking you somewhere far away from all of this. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe. Deal. And if we don't survive, we will. But if we don't... Reyna kissed him again, softer this time. Then at least we'll die knowing we chose each other, even when every rational reason said not to. That's a terrible epitaph. Better than dying alone. Marcus reappeared in the doorway. Sir, the other locations are evacuating now. ETA 23 minutes for full convergence. And we've got updated intelligence on the Volkov forces. Lucien released Reyna and moved to the table. Show me. Marcus spread out new documents, satellite imagery, personnel counts, weapon inventories that made Reyna's stomach drop. They're coming with approximately 60 fighters, Marcus reported. Heavy weapons, body armor, coordinated entry teams. This isn't a raid. This is an invasion. 60 against our 78, Lucien said, studying the numbers. Not impossible odds. No, sir, but they're better equipped. And they're not defending. They're attacking, which gives them the initiative. Then we take away their initiative. Lucien's finger traced entry points on a building schematic. They'll approach from street level, which means they funnel through these choke points. We fortify here, here, and here, create overlapping fields of fire, force them to either commit fully or retreat. And if they commit, then it becomes close quarters combat, which neutralizes their equipment advantage. He looked up. How long until they arrive? Best estimate? 45 minutes. Then we have 45 minutes to turn this building into something they can't take. Lucien straightened, his entire bearing transforming into something harder and more dangerous. Assemble the defensive teams. I want every entry point barricaded, every weapon distributed, every person clear on their position and fallback protocols. Yes, sir. Marcus left. Lucien turned to Reyna. Last chance. You can still leave. I'm not leaving. Then you need to understand something. He crossed to a locked cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a handgun. If the building falls, if they breach the inner defenses, I need you to make a choice. He held out the weapon. Reyna stared at it, her hands suddenly cold. You want me to... I want you to have options. His voice was steady, clinical. If it comes down to capture or death, you choose. Not them. You. Reyna looked at the gun, then at Lucien, then back to the gun. I don't know how to use this, she said quietly. Safety here. Point and pull the trigger. It's not complicated. Lucien, take it, please. She took the weapon with shaking hands. It was heavier than she expected, colder. The weight of it felt like accepting something terrible and irreversible. I really hope I don't have to use this, she said. So do I. He cupped her face gently. But if it comes to that, if we're about to lose, I need you to know that loving you was the best decision I ever made. Even if it ends badly, even if we're both about to die. You made me believe I could be something other than what my father built me to be. You can still be that. We can still, maybe. But if not, if tonight is all we get, then I'm grateful we had it at all. Reyna felt tears burning behind her eyes. That sounds like goodbye. It's not. It's just... He paused. It's honesty, which is what you asked for. She kissed him once more, tasting salt and desperation and something that felt like the edge of forever. Then the building's alarms started wailing. Lucien pulled away immediately, every trace of vulnerability vanishing behind cold calculation. They're here early, he said. Get to the inner security room. Now. What about you? I'll be coordinating defense from operations. Go. Marcus appeared again, looking grim. Sir, we've got movement on multiple approach vectors. They're surrounding the building. How many? At least 70, maybe more. More than we estimated. Yes, sir. Lucien's expression didn't change. Then we adjust. Lock down all entries except the main access point. Force them through a single choke point. That concentrates our defense, but also concentrates their attack into a kill zone we control. Do it. Marcus hesitated for just a second, then nodded and left. Lucien turned to Reyna one last time. Whatever happens, he said, remember that I chose you over the Empire, over survival, over everything. Don't talk like you're already dead. I'm talking like someone who understands probabilities. He pressed something into her hand, a key card. Inner security room, 4th floor. If the building falls, there's a tunnel that leads to the subway system. Take it. Lucien, go, now. She went, running through corridors that suddenly felt like a maze, following signs she barely comprehended, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She found the security room, a reinforced space with monitors showing feeds from throughout the building. 2 other people were already there, both armed, both looking terrified. On the screens, Reyna could see Lucien's forces taking positions, barricading doors, distributing weapons, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. And outside, visible on the exterior cameras, black vehicles were pulling up, doors opening, armed figures emerging. More than 70, Reyna realized, closer to 90. They were outnumbered. She watched Lucien on one of the interior feeds, standing in the operations room surrounded by his command team, giving rapid instructions with the calm precision of someone who'd accepted whatever came next. The first gunshot echoed through the building, then another, then a sustained burst of automatic weapon fire that made the walls shake. The screens filled with smoke and chaos and movement too fast to track. Reyna pressed one hand against her mouth to keep from screaming. On the monitor, she watched Lucien draw his weapon and move toward the sound of gunfire with the same empty expression she'd seen in the conference room earlier. The expression of someone who'd stopped hoping for survival and was now just fighting to take as many enemies with him as possible. And Reyna understood with horrible clarity that she was about to watch the man she loved die. Not someday, not eventually. Tonight. Right now. while she sat useless in a reinforced room, holding a gun she didn't know how to use, and the gun felt impossibly heavy in Reina's hand while the monitors showed hell unfolding 3 floors below. Gunfire echoed through the building in sustained bursts that made the reinforced walls vibrate. On screen, smoke filled the main corridor. Muzzle flashes strobed through the gray like lightning. Bodies moved through the chaos with lethal precision, both attackers and defenders indistinguishable in the haze, except for the direction they were shooting. One of the security personnel beside Reina, a woman in her 20s with a radio pressed to her ear, suddenly spoke. "They've breached the east entrance, 12 hostiles through the loading dock." The second guard swore under his breath. That wasn't supposed to be accessible. They brought explosives, blew the reinforced door clean off. On the monitors, Reina watched Lucien's forces pivot, redirecting half their defensive position to counter the new entry point. The coordination was impressive even through the chaos. Hand signals, disciplined fire control, tactical retreats to more defensible positions. But the Volkov forces kept coming. Wave after wave pushing through the breach, forcing Lucien's people back inch by bloody inch. Reina found Lucien on one of the interior feeds. He was 3 floors down in a corridor junction, weapon raised, firing controlled bursts at targets she couldn't see from the camera angle. His movements were economical, practiced, terrifying in their efficiency. She watched him drop behind cover as return fire chewed through the drywall above his head. Watched him reload without looking, muscle memory taking over. Watched him emerge and fire again with the cold precision of someone who'd been doing this his entire life. This was what he'd tried to protect her from seeing, not the aftermath. The actual machinery of survival. The radio crackled. "Second floor is compromised. We've got casualties. 3 down, 5 wounded." The woman beside Reina's hands were shaking as she responded. "Fall back to the 3rd floor defensive line. Do not engage in open corridor combat." "Copy." On the screens, Reina watched men carrying wounded comrades, blood trailing behind them on concrete floors. Watched defenders abandoning prepared positions under overwhelming fire. Watched the Volkov forces advance with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche. They were losing. She could see it in the way Lucien's people kept retreating, in the shrinking radius of their defensive perimeter, in the growing number of bodies that didn't get back up. "How many of ours are left?" the male guard asked quietly. The woman checked her tablet. 41 combat effective, 12 wounded, 19 dead. 19 dead in less than 10 minutes. Reina felt bile rising in her throat. On the monitor, Lucien was moving again, not forward but sideways, repositioning to a better vantage point. 2 of his people followed, providing covering fire while he relocated. Then one of them jerked suddenly, red mist blooming from his shoulder. He went down hard. Lucien didn't hesitate. He grabbed the wounded man's tactical vest and dragged him backward into cover, still firing one-handed at the approaching Volkov forces. The second defender laid down suppressing fire, a sustained burst that forced the attackers back temporarily, while Lucien pulled his wounded soldier to relative safety. That was when Reina saw it. Movement on a different camera feed. 3 Volkov fighters flanking around through an undefended service corridor, approaching Lucien's position from the blind side. "He doesn't see them," Reina said, voice cracking. "Someone needs to—" The woman was already on the radio. "Alpha team, you've got 3 hostiles flanking from the service corridor, northwest corner, approximately 20 seconds from your position." Static. Then Lucien's voice, strained but controlled. "Copy. Adjusting." On screen, Reina watched him pass the wounded man to another defender, then move toward the corridor entrance. He took position behind a concrete support column, weapon raised, waiting. The first Volkov fighter appeared in the corridor entrance. Lucien didn't wait. 2 shots. Center mass. The man went down. The second fighter emerged already firing. Bullets sparked off the concrete inches from Lucien's head. He returned fire, forcing the attacker back behind cover. Then the third fighter came through fast and low, catching Lucien in a tactical bind. 1 target behind cover, another advancing at an angle that eliminated his protection. Reina watched Lucien make the calculation in microseconds. Commit to the advancing threat or maintain cover from the entrenched one. He chose aggression. Lucien stepped out of cover, firing at the advancing fighter while simultaneously moving laterally to put the concrete column between himself and the entrenched target. 3 shots. The advancing fighter dropped, but the entrenched fighter had an angle now. Reyna saw it before it happened. Saw the barrel emerging from cover. Saw the firing arc that would catch Lucien exposed. She screamed at the monitor. "Move!" Lucien was already moving. Whether he heard the radio warning or just felt the threat, he threw himself sideways as gunfire chewed through the space where he'd been standing. He hit the floor hard, rolled, came up firing. The third Volkov fighter went down. Lucien stayed down for a moment, breathing hard, weapon still raised. Then he pushed himself upright and moved back to his original position. The woman beside Reyna exhaled shakily. Jesus. How is he still alive? The male guard asked. Training, experience, and probably a lot of luck. On the monitors, the battle continued its brutal mathematics. Volkov forces kept pushing. Lucien's defenders kept falling back. The defensive perimeter kept shrinking. "We're down to the third floor," the woman reported. "If they breach that, then we fall back to the secondary defensive line." The male guard's voice was grim. "And start praying." Reyna looked at the gun in her hand, looked at the monitors showing carnage 3 floors below, looked at Lucien fighting with the desperate precision of someone who understood he was running out of options. She made a decision. "I need to get down there," she said. Both guards turned to stare at her. "Ma'am, with respect, that's insane," the woman said. "You're a civilian. I'm also the reason he's fighting this hard." Reyna's voice was steadier than she felt. "And if this building falls, I'm not sitting up here watching it happen on cameras. Mr. Moretti gave explicit orders. I don't care about his orders." Reyna moved toward the door. "I'm going down there." The male guard stepped between her and the exit. "I can't let you do that." "You gonna shoot me?" "If I have to keep you safe." They stared at each other while gunfire rattled through the building and the monitors showed Lucien's forces losing ground with every passing minute. Then the radio crackled with a new voice, panicked, strained. "All units, we have a breach on the 4th floor. Repeat, 4th floor is compromised. Multiple hostiles in the east wing." The 4th floor. This floor. The male guard's expression went from determined to terrified in seconds. "How did they— Service elevator," the woman said, pulling up new camera feeds. "They bypassed the main defenses and came up through the maintenance shaft." On the monitors, Reyna could see armed figures moving through corridors that were suddenly far too close for comfort. "Lock down this room," the male guard ordered. "Now!" The woman moved to engage the reinforced door locks. Heavy bolts slid into place with mechanical finality. "How many?" the guard asked. "At least 8, heavily armed. Moving toward—" The woman paused, checking the feeds. "Toward us." The guard looked at Reyna. "Get behind the desk. Stay down. Do not make a sound." "What are you—" "Defending this room, which is what I was ordered to do." Reyna moved behind the desk on instinct, crouching low, gun still clutched in her shaking hands. Through the gap beneath the desk, she could see both guards taking positions flanking the door, weapons raised. The sounds of gunfire were louder now, closer. No longer muffled by 3 floors of concrete and steel. Right outside. Someone tried the door handle, found it locked. Silence. Then the unmistakable sound of an explosive charge being set. "Brace!" the male guard shouted. The explosion ripped through the reinforced door like it was tissue paper. The blast wave slammed into the room with physical force, overturning furniture, shattering monitor screens, filling the air with smoke and debris. Reyna's ears rang. Her vision swam. Everything tasted like copper and burnt plastic. Through the smoke, figures emerged. The male guard opened fire immediately. Controlled bursts. 3 attackers went down. 4. The woman joined in, catching 2 more in a crossfire that was brutally effective. But there were too many. Return fire filled the room. The male guard jerked backward, red blooming across his chest. He went down hard and didn't move. The woman kept firing, but her weapon locked empty. She reached for a spare magazine. Didn't make it. 2 shots. She crumpled. Reyna pressed herself against the desk, trying to make herself invisible, trying not to breathe, trying not to exist. Heavy boots on debris. Multiple sets. Moving through the room systematically. A hand grabbed the desk and shoved it aside. Reyna found herself staring up at 3 armed men, all wearing tactical gear, all pointing weapons directly at her face. "Found something,"
one of them said in heavily accented English. He grabbed Reina's arm and hauled her upright. The girlfriend. Reina's legs wouldn't support her weight. The man kept her upright through sheer grip strength. Dmitri wants her alive, another said. She's leverage. The first man, the one holding Reina, spoke into his radio. We have the primary target, 4th floor security room, requesting extraction orders. Static. Then a new voice, older and cold. Bring her to the ground floor, front entrance. Make sure Moretti knows we have her. Copy. They pulled Reina toward what remained of the door. She tried to resist, tried to pull away, but the grip on her arm was iron. Walk, or we drag you, the man said. Your choice. Reina walked. They moved through corridors she didn't recognize, past bodies she couldn't look at, through smoke that made her eyes water. The sounds of gunfire were sporadic now, isolated bursts rather than sustained combat. The battle was ending, and from the looks on the Volkov fighters' faces, they'd won. They took her down emergency stairs, weapons trained on her the entire time, radios crackling with tactical updates. 3 floors, 2, ground level. The main entrance lobby was a war zone. Bodies everywhere. Bullet holes cratering every surface. Blood smeared across marble floors. The acrid smell of gunpowder so thick it was hard to breathe. And in the center of it all, surrounded by at least 20 Volkov fighters, stood a man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile decades ago. Dmitry Volkov. He looked at Reina with cold assessment as the guards brought her forward. So this is what made Lucian Moretti soft, he said in lightly accented English. Disappointing. I expected someone more impressive. Reina didn't respond, just tried to keep her legs steady and her breathing controlled. Dmitri gestured to one of his men. Bring Moretti here. Tell him we have his weakness. Tell him if he wants her alive, he comes unarmed and surrenders. The man left. Dmitri turned back to Reina. You cost me a great deal tonight. 23 of my people dead. Millions in operational expense. All because Moretti decided to play hero over a medical illustrator. He stepped closer. I hope you were worth it. Go to hell, Reina said, voice shaking but clear. Dmitri smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Ah, some spirit. Good. It will make the lesson more effective. 5 minutes crawled past like hours. Then movement in the north corridor. Lucien emerged from the smoke, hands raised, no visible weapons. His clothes were torn and blood-soaked. His face was bruised, cut across the cheekbone, exhaustion carved into every line. But his eyes were clear and hard and focused entirely on Reina. He looked at her, then at Dmitri. Let her go, he said, voice steady despite everything. Why would I do that? Dmitri asked. She's the only thing preventing me from putting a bullet in your skull right now. Because she's not part of this world. She's a civilian. She doesn't know anything about our operations. She's useless to you as leverage. On the contrary, she's extremely useful. Dmitri gestured, and one of his men pressed a gun to Reina's temple. She ensures your compliance. Lucien's expression didn't change, but Reina saw his hands clench. What do you want? Everything. Your territory. Your operations. Your connections. Complete dissolution of the Moretti organization and absorption into mine. Dmitri paused. And you, publicly acknowledging submission, on your knees. The words hung in the blood-scented air like a physical weight. Lucien looked at Reina. Their eyes met across the demolished lobby. She saw the calculation happening behind his exhausted expression. Saw him weighing options that all led to terrible outcomes. Saw the moment he made his choice. Okay, he said quietly. Dmitri raised an eyebrow. Okay? I accept your terms. Release her, and I'll give you everything you want. Including the public submission? Yes. Dmitri studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. You really do love her. How pathetic. He gestured. The gun at Reina's temple lowered slightly. Kneel, Dmitri ordered. Lucian lowered himself slowly to his knees on the debris-strewn marble, hands still raised, every movement deliberate and controlled. The sight of him, this man who'd built an empire on fear and violence, kneeling in surrender was somehow more terrible than all the bloodshed Reina had witnessed. Now say it, Dmitri said.
Say you submit. Say the Moretti organization is finished. Lucian's jaw clenched, but he spoke clearly. I submit. The Moretti organization is dissolved. You win. Dimitri's smile widened. Record this. I want everyone to see Lucien Moretti on his knees. One of the Volkov fighters pulled out a phone, starting to film. That was when Reyna saw it. Movement behind Dimitri. In the smoke. 3 figures emerging with weapons raised. Lucien saw it too. His eyes shifted fractionally. A warning. Dimitri noticed. Started to turn. Too late. The first shot took down the man holding Reyna. She dropped to the floor as chaos erupted. Lucien moved with lethal speed, no longer unarmed, pulling a concealed pistol from his boot and firing in a single fluid motion. Dimitri took a round in the shoulder and went down. The 3 figures in the smoke, Lucien's people who'd somehow survived, opened fire on the Volkov forces with brutal efficiency. The lobby became a killing floor, crossfire from multiple directions. Volkov fighters going down or diving for cover. The carefully controlled scene dissolving into pure violence. Reyna covered her head and pressed herself flat against the blood-slicked marble, trying to make herself invisible while gunfire raged overhead. She heard Lucien shouting orders, heard return fire, heard screaming. Then hands grabbed her, gentle this time, and pulled her backward. Come on, move, now! Marcus. Somehow still alive despite the blood soaking his tactical vest. He dragged Reyna toward cover behind an overturned security desk while the firefight continued. Once behind relative safety, he pressed a radio into her hand. Stay down. Don't move. I'm going back for Moretti. Then he was gone. Reyna peered around the desk's edge. The lobby was carnage. Bodies everywhere. Smoke so thick it was hard to see more than 10 feet. The remaining Volkov forces were retreating toward the exits, carrying their wounded, including Dimitri. And in the center of it all, Lucien was advancing, weapon raised, firing with the cold precision of someone who'd accepted that survival meant absolute brutality. He reached Dimitri's position, aimed directly at the older man's head. Wait! Dimitri shouted. We can negotiate! You had your negotiation, Lucien said, voice empty. This is the consequence. He fired once. Dmitri Volkov died on the marble floor of a building he'd tried to conquer, surrounded by the bodies of people who'd followed him into disaster. The gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Lucien lowered his weapon slowly, looked around at the carnage, at the bodies, at the remains of his organization scattered across expensive marble. Then he looked at Reyna. She stood on shaking legs and walked toward him, stepping carefully around debris and bodies until she stood directly in front of him. They stared at each other. You were never unarmed, she said quietly. No. You planned this, the surrender, the submission, all of it. Yes, I needed them to think they'd won, needed them to drop their guard just enough. He stopped. Dimitri would have never come into the open if he didn't think I was beaten. So you let him think he'd broken you? Yes. Reyna looked at the devastation around them. How many of your people are left? I don't know, maybe 20, maybe less. And the Volkovs? Broken, leaderless. They'll scatter or get absorbed by other organizations. He paused. It's over. Over? The war, the immediate threat, everything that's been building for the past month. Lucien looked at her steadily. We won. Barely. But we won. Reyna felt something cracking inside her chest. Relief and horror and exhaustion all colliding at once. I thought I was going to watch you die, she said, voice breaking. I thought they were going to kill you. Lucien reached out slowly, touching her face like he couldn't quite believe she was real. When they took you, when I got that radio call saying they had you, I nearly lost my mind. But you stayed in control. I had to. Losing control would have gotten you killed. His hand was shaking against her cheek. I would have given them everything, the empire, my life, anything, if it meant you survived. I know. That's dangerous. That's exactly the kind of weakness Sophia warned you about. I know that too. Reyna pressed her hand over his. But I also know you came for me anyway, and when you thought I was going to die, you were willing to destroy yourself to prevent it. Yes, that's not weakness, that's love. Lucien pulled her against him suddenly, hard enough to hurt,
desperate enough that she felt his entire frame shaking with the aftershock of too much adrenaline and too many near-death experiences. "I can't do this anymore," he said into her hair. "I can't keep fighting. I can't keep losing people. I can't keep living in a world where every day might end with you in a body bag." "Then don't." He pulled back enough to look at her. "What?" "Don't keep doing this. You said it yourself. You've won. The Volkovs are broken. Your position is secure. So take this moment and actually change something." "It's not that simple." "Make it that simple." Reyna held his face between her hands. "You just executed a man in front of 40 witnesses. You just survived a war. You've proven beyond any doubt that you're still dangerous, still capable, still someone nobody should cross. Use that. Use the fear you just created to negotiate your actual exit." "From everything?" "From everything that requires you to kill people to maintain power." She pressed closer. "You said you wanted something different. You said you wanted to sleep more than 4 hours a week. You said you wanted a life where I don't watch the news wondering if you're dead. So take it. Right now. While you have the leverage." Lucian stared at her like she'd offered him something impossible. What if they see it as weakness? They just watched you fake surrender, execute their leader, and wipe out their entire assault force with a trap they never saw coming. Nobody's going to see you as weak. They're going to see you as terrifying. She paused. Use that. Use their fear to buy your freedom. Around them, Lucian's surviving forces were beginning to regroup, counting casualties, securing the building, moving with the exhausted efficiency of people who'd survived something they shouldn't have. Marcus appeared beside them, limping but alive. "Sir, building is secure. We've got 23 survivors, 14 wounded but stable. The Volkov forces retreated. We're tracking their movement, but they seem to be scattering." Lucian looked at him, then at Reyna, then back to Marcus. "Start the calls," he said quietly. "Sir, all the families, all the organizations, everyone who's been circling, tell them I want a meeting. Tomorrow. Neutral ground." Lucian's voice was steady, certain. "Tell them I'm proposing a restructuring. Complete dissolution of the Moretti Empire's active operations. Territory distributed among remaining organizations with negotiated boundaries. I'm out." Marcus stared at him. "Sir, with respect, I'm serious. I'm done. I want out. And I'm willing to negotiate terms that ensure my exit doesn't create a power vacuum that causes another war. They'll never agree to just let you walk away. They will if the alternative is watching me defend my territory by executing everyone who challenges me." Lucian gestured at the carnage around them. "I just proved I'm willing to burn everything down rather than submit. They know that now, so they'll negotiate. Because negotiation is cheaper than war." Marcus looked at the bodies, the blood, the evidence of violence committed with absolute precision. "Yes, sir," he said finally. "I'll make the calls." He left. Lucien turned back to Reyna. "This could still fail. They could refuse, could demand more than I'm willing to give. Then you fight. But at least you tried. And if I actually get out, if I somehow negotiate my way free of all this, then you figure out who you are without an empire to run, without violence to maintain power, without any of the structures you've used to define yourself for your entire adult life. That's terrifying. Good. You should be terrified. Starting over is terrifying." Reyna stepped closer. "But I'll be there, and we'll figure it out together." "You keep saying that word, because I keep meaning it." Lucian kissed her, hard and desperate and full of something that might have been hope if hope weren't such a dangerous thing to carry. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against hers. "If we survive this," he said quietly, "if I actually manage to walk away from everything I've built, we're going somewhere quiet, somewhere far from here, somewhere we can both just breathe. Deal." Around them, the building slowly came back to life. Security systems resetting, medical teams arriving for the wounded, the organized chaos of people trying to restore order to catastrophe. But in the center of it all, two people stood holding each other like they were the only stable things in a collapsing world. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over Manhattan. A new day. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future felt like something other than an approaching disaster. It felt like possibility. Dangerous, uncertain, requiring fundamental transformation to achieve, but possible. And in a world defined by violence and survival, Possibility was the most revolutionary thing either of them had ever chosen. Sec.
24 hours later, Reyna sat in a conference room in a neutral hotel while Lucien negotiated the dismantling of his empire. She wasn't allowed in the actual negotiation. Civilians weren't permitted in these discussions. But she could see everything through the glass walls separating the observation room from the main conference space. 8 organizations represented, 37 people total, more lawyers than Reyna had ever seen in one place. And Lucien, sitting at the head of the table, systematically offering pieces of his territory in exchange for guarantees of safe exit. It took 11 hours. 11 hours of tense negotiation where voices were raised, threats were implied, and the entire structure nearly collapsed at least 4 times. But Lucien held firm. He'd survived their best attempt to destroy him. He'd executed their most powerful rival. He'd proven beyond doubt that pushing him would result in catastrophic violence. So they negotiated. Territory divisions, financial settlements, agreements about boundaries and protocols, the careful dismantling of a 40-year-old criminal empire and its redistribution among organizations that had spent decades trying to destroy it. When the final documents were signed, every page notarized, every clause verified, Lucien stood from the table and walked out without looking back. He found Reyna in the observation room, standing by the window overlooking the city that had almost killed them both. "It's done," he said quietly. "You're free. As free as anyone gets in my world. I've divested all active operations, maintained enough financial assets to live comfortably, but nothing that requires management or violence, and secured agreements that as long as I stay out of operations, nobody comes after me. Do you trust them? No. But I trust fear, and they're all afraid of what I'll do if they violate the agreement." He moved to stand beside her. "It's not perfect, it's not clean, but it's out." Reyna took his hand. "What now?" "Now we disappear for a while. Let everything settle. Let people forget I exist." He turned to look at her. "Where do you want to go?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can work without looking over my shoulder. Somewhere you can sleep more than 4 hours without planning for survival." "That's a short list." "Then we make it work anyway." They stood together looking out at Manhattan while the city continued its relentless rhythm below, completely unaware that somewhere in its architecture, 2 people had just chosen something other than the lives they'd been given. It wasn't clean, it wasn't simple. It would require constant vigilance and probably periodic renegotiation, and definitely more complications than either of them could anticipate. But it was theirs. And for 2 people who'd spent most of their lives feeling fundamentally disconnected from everyone around them, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. "I love you," Lucien said quietly. "I know." Reyna squeezed his hand. "I love you too. Even after everything you've seen? Especially after everything I've seen, because now I know exactly who you are, and I'm still choosing to stay. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Definitely both." She smiled. "But we've established I'm good at making stupid decisions. Like answering a wrong number text at 2 a.m.? Exactly like that." They left the hotel together, walking out into late afternoon sunlight that felt like absolution, knowing that somewhere behind them, the machinery of their former lives was continuing without them. And for the first time in years, neither of them looked back. The future waited. Uncertain. Dangerous. Requiring transformation. But possible. And in the end, possibility was the only thing either of them had ever really needed. That and each other. Together. Finally. Completely. 3 months after the night Manhattan nearly swallowed them both, Reyna stood in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and ocean salt instead of burnt ambition and fear. The house was small, a rental on the coast of Northern California where cliffs met the Pacific in a collision of stone and permanence. 2 bedrooms. Windows that faced west toward water that stretched to the horizon. No neighbors within shouting distance. No surveillance. No armed guards positioned at strategic intervals. Just silence broken only by waves and seagulls and the occasional sound of Lucien moving through rooms like he was still learning how to exist without looking over his shoulder. Reyna poured coffee into 2 mugs and carried them to the deck, where Lucien sat watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of fire and gold. He took the offered mug without looking away from the ocean. hands wrapped around the ceramic like he was trying to absorb its warmth. He looked different now, thinner, the sharp edges of his face more pronounced from months of irregular eating and worse sleep, but also somehow lighter, like the weight he'd been carrying his entire adult life had finally been set down, leaving him hollow, but breathing. "You were up early," Raina said, settling into the chair beside him. "Couldn't sleep. Nightmares again?" "Memories. There's a difference." Raina didn't push. She'd learned in the past 3 months that Lucian processed trauma the way other people processed mathematics, systematically, carefully, refusing to look away from the calculations even when they hurt. They sat in silence while the sun continued its ascent and the ocean continued its eternal rhythm, and somewhere far away, the city that had almost destroyed them continued existing without their participation. "Marcus called yesterday," Lucian said finally. "While you were working." Raina's chest tightened. What did he want? "To update me on the agreements. Make sure everyone's still holding to the negotiated boundaries." Lucien took a slow sip of coffee. "They are. So far. Do you believe it'll last?" "No. Eventually someone will push, test the limits, see if I'm really out or just waiting." He glanced at her. "But for now, it's holding, and that's more than I expected." "What did you tell Marcus?" "That I'm done. That he's in charge of managing whatever limited operations remain. That I don't want updates unless there's an immediate threat requiring my attention." He paused. "And that I'm not coming back." Raina studied his profile. How did that feel, saying it out loud? Terrifying, liberating, both at the same time. He set down his mug. "I spent 20 years building an empire. And in one conversation, I handed it to someone else and walked away. It feels like I should be mourning, but mostly I just feel tired." "You are tired. You've been running on adrenaline and survival instinct for so long you forgot what rest feels like." "I don't think I ever knew what rest felt like." Lucian turned to look at her fully. "My father trained that out of me when I was 12. Rest is vulnerability. Vulnerability is weakness. Weakness gets you killed." "Your father was wrong." "Was he? I'm alive because I internalized those lessons, because I never let my guard down, because I treated everyone around me like potential threats." He looked back at the ocean. "And now I'm trying to unlearn 20 years of conditioning while living in a house with no security where any enemy with patience could find me." "But nobody's come." "Yet." Raina reached over and took his hand. "Nobody's coming. You negotiated your exit. You proved you're more dangerous as an unpredictable variable than as a managed threat. They're going to leave you alone because the alternative is too expensive. You have a lot of faith in people motivated entirely by self-interest. I have faith in your reputation, which is terrifying enough that nobody wants to test whether you're actually retired or just waiting for someone to give you an excuse to come back." Lucien squeezed her hand. "What if I am waiting? What if part of me wants someone to push just so I can prove I'm still capable of extreme violence? Then you'll deal with it. But you don't get to live in hypothetical threats. You don't get to prepare for wars that haven't started yet." She turned his face toward her gently. "You're out. You survived. You're alive and breathing and sitting on a deck watching the sunrise instead of coordinating defensive positions. That's not weakness. That's winning." "It doesn't feel like winning." "What does it feel like?" Lucien was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like any second now, someone's going to kick down the door and prove that everything I've built here is just temporary delusion." That's trauma talking, not reality. How do you tell the difference? Time, repetition, days that pass without violence. Mornings like this where nothing happens except coffee and sunrise. She squeezed his hand. "You survived something catastrophic. Your brain is still trying to process that. It's going to take more than 3 months to convince yourself you're actually safe." "What if I'm never convinced?" "Then you learn to live with the uncertainty, but you don't let it control you." They sat together while the sun climbed higher, and the coffee went cold, and the Pacific continued its conversation with the cliffs in a language older than human fear. Eventually, Lucien spoke again. "I got an email from Sophia." Raina went very still. "What did she say?" "That she heard about my exit, that she was surprised I actually managed to walk away." He paused. "And that she was sorry. For the threats. for trying to scare you off. For all of it. Do you believe her?
I don't know. Maybe. She's working in Prague now, completely disconnected from anything involving my former world. So either she's genuinely sorry, or she's just pragmatic enough to know that apologizing costs her nothing. Are you going to respond? I already did. Told her I accepted her apology and wished her well. Lucien looked at Reina. She was right about a lot of things. About how dangerous it is to be close to me. About the cost of standing beside someone whose world operates on violence. She just didn't account for the possibility that I'd actually change. You haven't changed. You've just chosen different priorities. That feels like semantics.
It's not. Change implies you're a different person. You're not. You're still capable of extreme violence, still strategically brilliant, still terrifying when you need to be. You've just decided those capabilities serve a different purpose now. Which is? Protection instead of empire. Survival instead of expansion. Living instead of just not dying. Lucien pulled her into his lap suddenly, wrapping both arms around her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to something real.
I don't know how to do this, he admitted into her hair. I don't know how to be a person instead of a function. Don't know how to have relationships that aren't transactional. Don't know how to want things that aren't strategic. Then we figure it out together, like we've been doing. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. They sat like that while the morning continued assembling itself around them, and somewhere in the distance, a boat horn sounded across the water. I'm working on something, Reina said eventually. I wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure how you'd react. Lucien pulled back enough to look at her. What kind of something? A medical illustration series about trauma. She paused. Physical trauma, specifically. What happens to bodies during extreme violence. How they break, how they heal, how the structures hold together or don't. That sounds heavy. It is, but it's also honest. And I think there's value in showing people the actual cost of violence instead of sanitizing it. She looked at him carefully. I've been using some of my experiences from the past few months as reference. The night of the attack, the casualties, the way bodies respond to gunfire and explosions. Are you okay with that? Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, if it helps you process what you saw, then yes, use whatever you need. It's not just for me. I think it might help other people too. Surgeons, emergency responders, anyone who deals with violence and needs to understand what they're actually looking at. You're turning trauma into education. I'm turning trauma into something useful instead of just carrying it like dead weight. She pressed closer. We both survived something terrible. We get to decide what that survival means, and I've decided mine means showing other people the truth about violence, so maybe they make better choices about whether to commit it. That's ambitious. That's purpose. She kissed him softly. You taught me that. When you decided to walk away instead of expanding. When you chose negotiation over retaliation. When you proved that even someone built for violence can choose something different. I didn't have a choice. Staying would have killed both of us. You absolutely had a choice. You could have kept fighting, could have defended your territory, could have turned Manhattan into a permanent war zone. But you didn't. You chose me, chose life, chose the possibility of something better. Lucien looked at her with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and disbelief. You give me too much credit. I give you exactly the credit you've earned, which is survival against impossible odds and the courage to walk away from power when most people would have doubled down. Courage. He said the word like it was foreign. I don't feel courageous. I feel like a coward who ran away. Then you don't understand what courage actually is. Courage isn't fearlessness. It's doing the right thing despite being terrified. And you were terrified. I saw it. But you did it anyway. They held each other while the Pacific wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and distance and the promise of weather moving in from the west. Eventually, Reina slid off his lap and stood. Come with me. I want to show you something. She led him inside to her workspace, the second bedroom converted into a studio with her drafting table positioned to catch the morning light. Across the table were sketches, dozens of them, studies in graphite and ink showing the internal architecture of bodies under stress. But these weren't clinical. These were emotional. A heart mid-beat, chambers distorted by adrenaline,
hands clasped together, tendons visible beneath translucent skin. A spine curved in exhaustion, vertebrae compressed by the weight of too much carried for too long. Lucien studied them in silence, moving from sketch to sketch with the focused attention he used to reserve for tactical assessments. "These are beautiful," he said finally, "and terrible, both at the same time. That's what I'm going for, truth without sanitization." Raina pointed to one sketch, a rib cage with a heart visible inside, cracks radiating through the bone structure like fault lines. "This one's about you, about holding yourself together through force of will, even when every structural support is failing." Lucien stared at the image. That's exactly what it felt like. Those last few weeks before the summit, like I was one more crisis away from complete structural collapse. But you didn't collapse. You held. And then you made the choice to set down the weight before it crushed you. With your help, with partnership, which is what this whole thing has always been about. She moved to stand beside him. We both spent our lives studying how things hold together. Me with anatomy, you with empires. And we both learned the same lesson. Nothing holds forever without maintenance, without choosing to reinforce the structures that matter and letting go of the ones that don't. Is that what we're doing here, reinforcing what matters? Yes. Us. Health. Actual rest instead of just survival. She took his hand. Building something sustainable instead of just impressive. Lucien pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head while they both looked at the sketches documenting the cost of their survival. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, "at being vulnerable, at accepting help, at living without the structures I used to define myself." "I know, but you're trying, and that's enough." "What if it's not? What if I wake up one day and realize I miss the empire more than I value peace?" "Then we deal with it. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're discovering that power is a poor substitute for actual connection, and that the empire was just a sophisticated way of avoiding intimacy." "That's probably accurate," he sighed. "My father built everything on the principle that attachment is weakness, that the only reliable thing is fear, and I inherited that worldview completely. And now? Now I'm learning that attachment is actually the only thing that made any of this bearable, that fear is exhausting to maintain, that the empire was just an elaborate prison I convinced myself was freedom." Raina turned in his arms to face him fully. "You're doing the work. You're processing the trauma. You're building something different. That's all anyone can do. It feels insufficient. Recovery always feels insufficient when you're in the middle of it. But look at where you were 3 months ago. You were coordinating defense against an invasion, executing threats, operating on 4 hours of sleep a week, and calling it normal. And now you're standing in a sunlit studio talking about emotions and letting yourself be held. That's not insufficient. That's transformation." Lucien kissed her forehead. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you have me anyway." They stood together, surrounded by sketches of anatomical truth. While outside the Pacific continued its endless conversation, and inside both of them, the slow work of healing continued in ways too subtle to measure but too real to deny. 6 months after walking away from Manhattan, Lucien received the call he'd been half expecting since the day he'd signed the dissolution papers. He was on the deck, again, always the deck when the weight got too heavy, when his phone buzzed with a number he recognized. Marcus. Lucien almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail and pretend he hadn't seen it, but that was cowardice disguised as peace, and he'd promised himself he was done with performance. He answered. "What's wrong?" "How do you know something's wrong?" Marcus's voice sounded tired. "Because you don't call unless it is." "What happened?" "The agreements are holding, but there's pressure. The Castellano family is pushing boundaries, testing whether the negotiated territories are actually fixed or just suggestions. They've made 3 incursions in the past month." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Have they drawn blood?" "Not yet, but it's escalating. And people are looking to me for direction, wanting to know if we respond with force or if we hold the line." "What have you told them?" "That I need to consult with you before authorizing any response that might violate the exit agreements." Lucien closed his eyes. "You're asking permission to go to war." "I'm asking guidance from someone who built these structures and understands their breaking points better than I do." "I'm out, Marcus. I negotiated my exit specifically so I wouldn't have to make these decisions anymore. I understand, but the organization still carries your name, still operates under the reputation you built. And the Castellanos are testing whether that reputation still has teeth or if it was just theater that ended when you walked away. It was never theater.
Then prove it. Give me guidance.
Because if I make the wrong call here, people die. Possibly a lot of people. And I'd rather have your strategic mind helping me avoid that outcome. Lucien opened his eyes and stared out at the Pacific, feeling the old machinery trying to engage inside his head. The tactical calculations, the strategic assessments, the cold mathematics of violence and consequence. Don't respond with force, he said finally. Not yet. Then what? Respond with precision. The Castellanos are pushing because they think you're weak. Prove them wrong without starting a war. Identify their most profitable operation, not their most visible, their most profitable, and neutralize it, quietly, completely, in a way that costs them money but doesn't spill blood. Economic warfare instead of actual warfare. Yes, because blood invites retaliation. Money just invites negotiation. Hit them where it hurts, then offer to restore what you took in exchange for respecting the agreed boundaries. That's actually brilliant. That's strategy instead of reaction. Lucien paused. But Marcus, this is the last time. I meant what I said about being out. You're running operations now, which means you need to start trusting your own judgment instead of asking me to validate it. I understand. Thank you. And Marcus? If the Castellanos refuse the negotiation and push for actual violence, you have my permission to respond proportionally, but only proportionally. No escalation, no making examples, just measured defense of negotiated territory. Yes, sir. The call ended. Lucien sat holding his phone, feeling the weight of the empire he'd supposedly left behind still pressing down on his shoulders like atmosphere. Reyna appeared in the doorway, sketch pencil still in hand. You gave him strategic guidance, she said. Not a question. Yes. Are you okay with that? Lucien considered the question honestly. I don't know. Part of me feels like I just violated my own exit by getting involved. But another part recognizes that walking away doesn't mean pretending I never built these structures. Doesn't mean refusing to help prevent unnecessary bloodshed. So where's the line? I think the line is this was advice, not command. I'm not making the decisions anymore. Marcus is. I'm just offering perspective from someone who's been where he is now and understands the cost of choosing wrong. He set down the phone. Does that make sense? Yes. You're being a resource instead of a leader. There's a difference. Is there? Or am I just rationalizing involvement because part of me misses the control? Reyna crossed the deck and sat beside him. Maybe both. Maybe you're being a resource and you miss the control. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, but what matters is you're not going back. You gave advice. You didn't take over. You stayed here instead of getting on a plane to Manhattan to handle it yourself. I thought about it. The plane. I know you did, but you didn't take it. That's what counts. They sat in silence while the afternoon stretched toward evening, and somewhere 3,000 miles away, Marcus was implementing strategy that might prevent or might trigger the next phase of violence. Do you regret it? Reyna asked eventually. Walking away? Every day. Lucien's honesty was raw. I regret leaving people who depended on me. I regret not being there to make decisions that could prevent casualties. I regret the loss of purpose that came with running an empire. But I don't regret choosing you. Don't regret choosing life over survival. Don't regret discovering that I'm more than just the function my father designed me to be. He took her hand. The regret exists, but it doesn't outweigh the reasons I left. That's growth. That's accepting discomfort without trying to fix it through violence. Also growth. Lucien pulled her close. I'm not good at this. At sitting with uncertainty. At accepting that I can't control outcomes anymore. Nobody's good at it. That's why it's called growth instead of comfort. She kissed his jaw. But you're doing it. You're learning to live with the fact that you're not responsible for solving every problem. That sometimes advice is enough, that you don't have to sacrifice your peace to maintain everyone else's safety. What if people die because I wasn't there? Then people die because someone else made the choice to commit violence, not because you chose peace. She pulled back to look at him directly. You're not responsible for the entire world. You're responsible for yourself, and for building a life that's actually worth living instead of just impressive to maintain. Those things feel connected. They're not. Your father made you believe they were so you'd never leave, so you'd feel obligated to sacrifice everything for the empire. But that was manipulation, not truth. Lucien absorbed that. Let it settle. Recognize the accuracy even though it's scraped against 20 years of conditioning. I'm going to have to unlearn this over and over, he said. Aren't I? Probably. Trauma doesn't resolve in a straight line. It spirals. You think you've processed something, then a phone call arrives, and suddenly you're right back where you started, relearning the same lesson. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's also how healing actually works, not magical transformation, just repeated choice to prioritize different things until eventually the new patterns become automatic. How long does that take? I don't know. Years, maybe? Maybe forever. But what's the alternative? Going back to Manhattan and resuming control over an empire that was slowly killing you? No. Then you keep doing the work, keep making the choice, keep learning to sit with discomfort instead of solving it through strategy and violence. They held each other while the afternoon faded toward evening and the Pacific took on the copper tones of approaching sunset. Thank you, Lucien said quietly. For what? For not letting me lie to myself. For seeing through the performance. For staying even after watching me at my absolute worst. You've seen me at my worst too. Terrified in a security room, frozen while gunfire raged around me, completely helpless while your world tried to swallow both of us. That wasn't weakness. That was being a normal human in an abnormal situation. Exactly. And so is this. You're a normal human trying to recover from an abnormal life. Give yourself the grace you'd give anyone else attempting something this difficult. Lucien kissed her properly, slow and thorough and full of gratitude he didn't have words for. When they broke apart, the sun was touching the horizon, painting everything in shades of fire and promise. I love you, he said, for seeing me, for staying, for believing I could be something other than what I was built to be. I love you too, for trying, for choosing something different, for proving that even someone designed for violence can choose peace without becoming weak. They watched the sunset together while miles away Marcus made decisions that would either prevent or trigger the next crisis, and neither of them could control the outcome. And that was terrifying, and that was okay, because control had never been the point. Connection was the point. Survival was the point. Building something worth protecting instead of just impressive to observe. And in the end, that was all either of them had ever really wanted. To be seen completely and chosen anyway. To survive and call it living. To discover that the strongest thing in the world wasn't power or violence or fear. It was two people deciding that despite everything, despite impossible odds and catastrophic circumstances and every rational reason to walk away, they would stay. Together. Imperfectly. Completely. And build something new from the ruins of what they'd left behind. 1 year after the night that almost killed them both, Reina's medical atlas published internationally to critical acclaim and immediate adoption by surgical training programs across 17 countries. The launch event was small by design, held in a gallery in San Francisco rather than New York, attended by surgeons and medical professionals rather than the kind of crowd that would have showed up when she was still connected to Lucien's empire. Lucien stood beside her in a simple dark suit, no entourage, no security beyond basic venue staff. Just presence. Just support. A trauma surgeon from UCSF approached them during the reception, holding a copy of Reina's atlas like it was sacred text. This is extraordinary work, she said. The way you've illustrated the progression of traumatic injury. It's unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of emergency medicine. Thank you, Reina said. I wanted to show the truth, not the sanitized version. You succeeded. These illustrations are going to save lives. By helping surgeons understand what they're actually seeing in trauma situations, you've created a resource that will prevent mistakes and improve outcomes. The surgeon paused. May I ask what inspired such detailed knowledge of catastrophic injury patterns? Reina glanced at Lucien. He nodded slightly. Personal experience, Reina said simply. I witnessed violence, and I decided to transform that trauma into something useful. That's remarkable courage. That's just survival, making meaning out of things that would otherwise be meaningless. The surgeon thanked her and moved on to examine more illustrations. Lucian leaned close to Reina's ear. You're brilliant, you know that? I'm just honest. There's a difference. No, you're brilliant and honest, which is rarer than you think. They stayed another hour, fielding questions and watching medical professionals engage with work that Reina had created from the ruins of the worst night of her life. When they finally left, walking out into San Francisco fog that softened the city lights into impressionist halos, Lucien took her hand. I'm proud of you, he said, for turning trauma into purpose, for building something that matters, for proving that survival can mean more than just not dying. I learned that from you. No, I learned it from you. I was just surviving, barely, until you showed me what actually living could look like. They walked in silence for a while, fog drifting around them like the city itself was breathing. Marcus called last week, Lucian said eventually. The Castellano situation resolved. Economic pressure worked. They negotiated new boundaries and everyone backed down. No bloodshed? None. Just money and pride, which means the agreements are holding. The empire I left behind is stable, and I'm actually out. How does that feel? Terrifying. Liberating. Still both. He squeezed her hand. But also right. I don't miss it the way I thought I would. I miss the certainty, the control, but I don't miss the cost of maintaining them. That's because you're discovering that uncertainty can be survived, that losing control doesn't mean losing yourself, that the cost of peace is discomfort, not death. When did you become so wise? When I fell in love with someone who taught me that the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break and choose to rebuild anyway. They stopped walking, stood facing each other on a fog-softened street corner while San Francisco continued its life around them, and neither of them were running anymore. I want to marry you, Lucian said suddenly. Reina's breath caught. What? Not immediately, not as performance, but eventually, when we've both healed enough that it's choice instead of desperation. I want to marry you, build an actual life, prove that two people designed for completely different worlds can choose to build a third world together. That's terrifying. I know, but so was everything else we've survived, and we're still here. Reina looked at him, at the exhaustion and hope and determination living in his expression simultaneously. Yes, she said. Yes? Yes. Eventually, when we're ready, when marriage means celebration instead of survival. Yes. Lucien pulled her into a kiss that tasted like fog and promise, and the future neither of them had expected to live long enough to see. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Reina pressed her forehead against his. We're going to be okay, she said. Not perfect, not easy, but okay. Because we're together? Because we chose each other, despite everything, despite impossible odds, despite every rational reason to walk away. We stayed, and that's the only thing that ever actually mattered. They walked back to their car holding hands, disappeared into San Francisco fog like two people who'd learned that the most powerful thing in the world wasn't empire or violence or control. It was choice. The choice to survive instead of just existing. The choice to connect instead of isolating. The choice to build something sustainable instead of just impressive. And the choice to love someone completely, knowing that love makes you vulnerable, knowing that vulnerability is dangerous, knowing that danger is the price of actually living. Because in the end, the greatest victory isn't surviving violence. It's choosing to keep living after violence ends. It's discovering that the person you become in the aftermath matters more than the person you were before. It's learning that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking completely and choosing to rebuild something better from the pieces. And for two people who'd spent most of their lives misunderstood, hidden, and emotionally unreachable, discovering each other was the most shocking thing either of them ever experienced. Not the danger, not the violence, not the empire that almost swallowed them both. Just the simple, devastating truth that someone saw who they actually were beneath all the performance and armor and careful construction. And stayed anyway.
Because sometimes the strongest thing in the world isn't power. Sometimes it's just finding the one person who sees the truth inside you. All the broken parts, all the terrible choices, all the darkness you carry, and says yes anyway. Yes to staying, yes to building, yes to discovering that love isn't about being perfect.
It's about being honest. And honesty, they'd learned, was the most revolutionary thing either of them had ever chosen. More revolutionary than empires, more powerful than violence, more enduring than fear. Just two people standing at 2:13 a.m. in a rain-soaked kitchen, sending 3 words to a wrong number, and discovering that sometimes the best things in life happen entirely by accident. And sometimes survival means more than just staying alive. Sometimes it means learning to live. Together, completely, against all odds, and building something worth surviving for in the first place.